on, you bastard!
Three things come to mind when you ask a Transformers fan what the 2000s were like. Movies, classics, and big, beefy gimmick toys. Especially in the former half of the decade, toy lines were dominated by Archer-era chunksters, loaded with play features and combining gimmicks. And none received more love and care than the multitude of Optimus Primes. Even at their clunkiest, they delivered some of the most iconic Primes the franchise has ever seen. Perhaps not to the general public, as they'll always associate Prime with the movies and G1, but definitely within the fandom. To this day, many still believe Prime is better suited as a fire engine as opposed to a flat nose or whatever you call this. I'm not a car guy, don't correct me in the comments, I don't care. Regardless, there's a lot of debate on which Prime from this period is the best. It usually boils down to two main contestants, and for a very long time, I've wanted to examine both and see which is the superior figure. So, well, today seems like as good a day as any. I've been afforded the opportunity to pit these two against each other, and I'm not going to pass it up. Greetings, Cybertronians. I'm DrLockdown, and welcome back to another Versus review. Yes, indeed, it's been a while since the last one of these. 2 years, actually. My, how time flies. Regardless, today we're taking the top two contenders and finding out which is the best Optimus Prime of the 2000s. 2001's Robots in Disguise Optimus Prime, or 2005's Cybertron Optimus Prime. Now, it's obvious from a glance that these two were created under very different circumstances. They're both fire engines, sure, but RID Prime turns into a realistic Japanese model, while Cybertron Prime goes into full 2000s sci-fi, not looking out of place next to many Hot Wheels designs. This really comes down to the development of the shows themselves, in regards to what each show was trying to achieve. Starting with the former of the two, and paraphrasing TF Wiki, in essence, Car Robots, RID's Japanese release, was a last-ditch effort to revitalize the brand in Japan. TF Wiki neglects to mention it was in the face of the idol apocalypse, thank you Macross, but nevertheless the line was basically them trying to tap into nostalgia and somehow save the franchise from the brink. TF Wiki claims this wasn't very successful, but given the love the show has these days over there, I'm not sure that's entirely accurate. Either way, most of the line consisted of retools, with only a few new ones thrown in here and there. The molds they did produce really needed to push what was capable in Transformers, and lay the groundwork for a potential road to redemption. And of course, this monster of a figure was brought to life by Hisashi Yuki, whom since it had somewhat of a spotty track record featuring bangers like Reveal the Shield Lugnut, HasLab Deathsaurus, and Legacy Evolution Skyquake and Dreadwing, passable outings like every modern Star Saber, and shows like Legacy Knockouts, and Legacy. Yeah, he did that one. Not that you'd know it from vehicle mode, however, because this alt mode is clean as a whistle and almost solid as a rock. Loosely based on the Mitsubishi Fuso K series K201, it's so unique yet unmistakably Optimus Prime. The front really comes to life with the piercing transparent blue windows, creating a mean downswept look a decade before it became Sentinel's thing. The grille section isn't super detailed, and I reckon they could have gone harder, but the orange and silver paint is very appreciated, and I like that they've incorporated the unpaintable foot silver covers into the design as great sections on the top. Some of the silver feels a bit bland, as the original Takara edition featured license plate printing there, but still, it looks nice enough. Interestingly though, the text on the side remains unchanged from said Takara edition. I guess Cybertron works as the Japanese name instead of the Japanese faction title for the Autobots, but keeping the fire department kanji seems like an odd choice on the west side. Apologies, my kanji is I had to use Google Translate. Interestingly, the wheels also retain the Fire Convoy text, the original Japanese name for the figure before Hasbro imported it. Yes, I know the majority of long-time viewers already know that, but come on, we're not all terminally online in this fandom. Speaking of wheels though, this figure features the lost arts of chromed wheels and rubber tires. It really gives the figure a premium feel, especially in a rolling motion. Of course, depending on who you ask, rubber tires may be considered a blessing or a curse. If you're hunting down a second-hand copy of this, you may find these cracked, or worse, completely missing. Fortunately, my copy is in good nick, but it is something to keep an eye out on. Moving further back, RD Prime sports a pretty impressive back section. The main robot cab tapers off pretty well with the embedded voice box and segmented grating. Overall, the grating motif really helps bring the alt mode together, even in the messier parts of the design. Yeah, there's no getting around it. That's clearly the combined robot mode chest back there. That said, as said many times before, messy truck backs kinda come with the territory, regardless of which line you collect. This is hardly the most egregious example, and they do a good job of making it not stick out too much. Even the head blends in pretty well, though you can see the designer used similar motifs between designs. Moving even further back, I love the extra painted details on the back, with the tail lights and steps. bits. These days in mainline, they just leave it blank. But back then they had that extra budget to play with, even with the Hasbro version. Even the underside of the ladder gets extra pistons and grills, which you'd normally never notice. You can tell they had fun greebling this the f up, even if it doesn't go to the same level as Modern Warfare Cybertron and Legacy figures. Will say though, the computer on the side is kinda funny. As far as I know, this feature doesn't have any use other than looking cool. Still, need to have. Of course, a fire engine that doesn't do anything isn't that useful, so beyond the lovely ratcheting and extending, which of course all vehicles of this side kinda need, he also comes with a couple of spring-loaded gimmicks. Push the red tab on the front and 2 water hoses spring out. Nothing special, just a nice little feature, though on my copy sometimes one of them gets stuck. Still works fine though, even with hose ectile dysfunction, but the real star of the show is the massive missile rack. Push this tab forward and 4 missiles become ready and primed. Or throw themselves into the ether if you get the original Takara version. It's a really cool yet unintrusive feature, and if you prefer to ignore it and focus on the realism of the truck, you can absolutely do it. This toy isn't packed with features, but what is here is quite fun. It doesn't actually seem like it's trying to pander to the nostalgia of then 30-something fans of G1, outside of being a truck after years of being a monkey. It just feels like a really fun and solid truck mode that kids and adults alike can enjoy within play. Well, almost solid. This is where my only real gripe with the figure comes about. Missing paint apps and visible combiner kibble I can easily give a pass, but what I don't like is the collection of solidity issues. The side panels don't really peg in, so even in light play, you can find them sliding out and ruining the rolling action. The joint at the back where the ladder connects to the grade section really seems to push itself away, and when combined with the ratchets, this section has a nasty habit of straight up falling apart. And even in a standard ladder pose, the joint connecting the combined feet to everything else has quite a bit of wiggle room. Doesn't feel like it'll come apart, but it's not as solid as I'd like personally. None of these issues are deal breakers per se, at least not like the rubber tires might be to some people, but they are there and they are noticeable. It feels like this mode is just shy of being perfect. Regardless, it's still an absolutely wonderful fire engine with minimal blemishes and a fun factor that still pulls its weight to this day. Especially with its beefy size, putting most modern commanders to shame, it's just a fun figure to roll around and play with. And even beyond play, it's an imposing enough design to look good on a shelf. The only other thing I could really ask for is better weapon storage, as the gun just sorta sits there instead of making use of the vast space on the inside. I'm aware you can place it at the front, but 1, this is more for the separated mode, 2, this makes the front of the truck look really bad, and 3, it's a stupid form of functionality anyway. It just doesn't look appealing, and I wish there'd been an extra spot on the inside for it. But that's hardly a substantial issue, considering everything else this lad does. Of course, if you want imposing factor, that's something the Cybertron edition holds in spades. This time helmed by Takashi Kunihiro, the mad lad behind G1 Hot Rod and Rodimus, Lio Kaiser, Classics Astro Train, 07 Optimus Prime, Universe Cyclonus, Revenge of the Fallen Lockdown and Optimus Prime, so we did both primes, Siege Omega Supreme, Buzzworthy Origins Bumblebee, and oh yeah, HasLab Unicron! That's him taking a sip of tea next to the bloody thing. Suffice to say, this guy has done a lot of really good toys over the year, and this toy is no exception. Of course, this one was developed as a Western concept first, with play value pushed to the forefront, even more so than the RID version. While Takara didn't really consider car robots a success in Japan, least at the time apparently, America did consider the imported Robots in Disguise one. As such, a partnership was formed, a collaboration between Hasbro Concepts and Japanese animation production. Prime comes at the tail end of this style, and in many ways, he's perfected it. You lose the realism, but you gain possibly one of the most creative fire engines in Transformers history. The front is an absolutely wonderful melting pot of 2000s aesthetics, with a mean as f grille and clear and concise color layouts. The blue windows on the RID version were fairly nice, but the shade here is utterly gorgeous. It pierces through the white frame, almost seeming like a snow vehicle. The white stripe below brings back that G1 style in a subtle way, and provides a nice bit of breakup. Also, correction for the last time I covered this design. No, not that one. There we go. Initially I assumed that increasing the white around the trim of the windows was a stylistic choice, but apparently it's accurate to the anime rendition of the design. My mistake, though I still don't like this approach. And technically the toys came first and the show was based on them, not the other way around. Just like Beast Wars and Moving further down, the grille adds just a hint of utilitarian stylization. Not enough to make this thing seem at all realistic, but still a very nice touch. I love how the fists become the bumper. It's such a unique and clever idea. Feels a bit toyetic at times, but that's part of this toy's charm as, well, a toy. The bronze highlights over the transparent blue backing are really nice too, though I think I might actually prefer the hybrid style's idea of using yellow instead. Not the execution, mind you, since it pulled it off piss poorly, but definitely the idea. Would have been nice to use something more striking, like the yellow they used on the floodlights. Wait a minute, why are the top lights painted? Yes, I'm afraid I have to come clean. This isn't actually Cybertron Optimus Prime. No, as this figure is a sponsored sample from Japan, it is actually the Galaxy Force version, featuring some subtle differences. Makes sense, if you buy a secondhand copy from Japan, chances are it's not going to be the American version. That said, the differences are pretty minimal. There aren't a lot of them, and it's mostly minor paint app changes and sound effect differences. Not that the latter matters anyway, since the sound effects don't even work on either of my copies. And nothing of value was lost. But yes, this being the Hasbro version and this being the Takara version isn't going to affect the outcome of this Versus review. And hey, it beats the original idea for this before the sponsor offered me this opportunity. Comparing RID Prime to the red and black later wave redeco, that would have been weird. This is Galaxy Force Galaxy Convoy, and this is Cybertron Galaxy Force Optimus Prime. Confused? Don't worry, we're not doing that, you'll be fine. Anywho, going into this, I thought I was going to be bothered by the hinges on the top. I mean, I was bothered on the red and black version beforehand, and yes, I'm referring to it as such to avoid confusion. But here it seems to blend in a lot better. The side windows also work quite well. It's a good way to hide the combining joints on the vehicle mode. Speaking of, no, we're not going to discuss the various combinations in this video. We're judging these on their own merits out of the box. What's the point of gut-eyeing if the base figure is shit, eh? Moving to the back, we probably get the most armored up trailer Optimus Prime has ever had, short of maybe those unofficial G.I. Joe ones. The greebling has really come a long way in 4 years, handled by a separate designer here. Fun fact, since the Unicron Trilogy, he's done a lot of deco designs, like Run Amok, and Combat Megatron, and Amazon Impactor and Spindle. Oh, is that a shark I see? Anyone got a jet ski? Regardless, the rivets and panels really bring this thing to life. And you even got echoes of robots in disguise with the grills on the gun modules. The gear sections towards the back might seem haphazard at first, but in the context of being an Optimus Prime, you quickly realize they're actually a throwback to the original trailer stripes. See them using the same shapes? Me, that's clever. The guns on the top also strike a nice balance between presence and proportion. They're big enough to feel imposing, but not so big they feel ridiculous. Combined with their ratcheted posing in 2 different directions, and you've got yourself something that honestly feels more like a tank at times. A tank truck. A TAC. Or an artillery vehicle. I really like how the hand cannon incorporates into the gun itself. It makes this thing feel a lot more cohesive, especially after RID Prime half-assed it. Both guns are also compatible with the line-wide gimmick, the Cyber Key Power! Basically, you get this big old key with every figure you get, and you jam it in there and a hidden weapon or extra feature opens up. It's probably my favorite feature of the trilogy, as it ends up being the least intrusive, aside from the Energon stars, which, can that even be counted as a gimmick feature? The key Prime comes with is actually one of the biggest differences between Hasbro and Takara versions, as here it has a gold border to accentuate the Matrix motif, while the Hasbro version is just clear blue. The Hasbro ones also have a code on the back, something to do with a now defunct site. Good news is, if you lose a key for any particular figure, they all work between them. Long as you have one key, your entire Cybertron collection should be fine. Regardless, the left one gets 2 small cannons flipping out, lame, and the right one opens up like a railgun. Pretty damn cool. These are supposed to light up and make sounds, but again, the electronics are nothing really lost here though, they're still fantastic toys without them. The right gun, both on the sides and the handgun attachment, also fires missiles. Unfortunately, however, this copy is missing most of them. Don't particularly mind though, as it looks fine without them. And how many adult collectors really use spring-loaded missiles? Much prefer the standard weapons we get on Chug these days. Of course, if you lose more than just the missiles and find yourself without the gun as well, it's not the end of the world. The cannon still works fine without the extra attachment. And if that wasn't enough, you have 2 extra guns on the inside that can fold out. Would have been nice if they rotated out even further, but I don't know if there was any extra budget left in these things. Already they're waffling up on the inside. Yeah, hollowness isn't necessarily a new thing. It very much existed way back when, just ask Armada Prime. Now of course, if this whole behemoth of a gun rack isn't to your speed, unlike RID Prime, it can be removed. You just pop that sucker off and, that certainly is a robot lying down. Look, I understand the nostalgia for this, especially as someone who grew up with the Legends version, or at least a KO of it, but you gotta take a step back and actually examine this in a vacuum. This is not a cohesive truck. It's basically SS-105, but way back in 2005. So that they can service the robot mode, the front of the truck is awesome, but the back is just some legs sitting down. They try to disguise it by extending it further with the super mode legs, but it actually ends up making it look worse. I guess the exposed matrix cavity is fine, if a bit hollow, but the exposed waist skirt really sticks out like a sore thumb. I personally love this configuration because it's basically my childhood come to life, but trying to put on a a critic's lens for a second, yeah, this is daft. That's not the only issue I have here though. There are a few blemishes that keep it from being a top tier vehicle, and these blemishes all real boil down to one key concept: solidity. Seems to be a running theme between these two. Try picking up the truck and you'll notice the legs start to droop. There's not really any tabs keeping them in place. The skirt piece sort of tries, but it fails miserably. All the weight is being held in place by the ratchets in the hips. I suppose it's better than Hybrid Style's non-existent attempt, but I feel a fold-out panel or just anything would have really solidified this as a near-perfect fire engine. Secondly, or I suppose thirdly at this point, I still don't like the spring-loaded wheels. They make more sense here now that the shins aren't made entirely out of die-cast, but I just worry about the longevity of these wheels. He rolls well thanks to the wheels being pinned, and they look lovely with the bronze paint, but how long will that last? I'm already lucky to have this in such good condition. The seller classified this as borderline junk, but I'm just not seeing it. Maybe it's the aforementioned missing missiles, but like, who cares? And finally, when combined with the trailer, yeah, the wings on the side still don't tab in anywhere. They do mostly stay in place thanks to the ratchets they've used, which again is infinitely better than old shitbread style, but like, couldn't have included a tab to at least keep these front sections in place? No? Real shame. Still, even with all of those blemishes, he's still a killer fire engine. He may not have the realism, but he more than makes up for it with his play value. This truck has 16 times the detail, and at least triple the play features. Unless you're a hardcore G1er who needs that G1 connection, it's an alt mode that easily worms your way into your heart with its sheer chunkitude and endless fun times. With that said, I still think I have to give this round to the Robots in Disguise version. The highs on Cybertron Prime are much higher, but only really by a little. RID Prime gets pretty damn close and is more consistent overall. Cybertron Prime has so many cool details in a vacuum, but RID Prime blends all the bits together in a really unique way. Sure, you can't remove the trailer from RID Prime without being left with an incoherent mess, but would you really call trailerless Cybertron Prime coherent either? An RID is just more solid. Sure, bits get a bit wibbly, but nowhere near on the level of the Cybertron version. Don't get me wrong, both figures deliver truly outstanding vehicle modes. These are both the creme de la creme of 2000s truck goodness. It's just that RID edges out ever so slightly. But that's just one part of the journey with these figures. How do they fare in the other aspects? Well, before jumping into the engineering, we've got one more section. See, what good is a trailer without a play function? You gotta add some fun factor into the mix, right? Well, both of these managed to come up with an idea to tick that box. Each figure handles its trailer compatibility differently. Robots in Disguise is a lot more parts formery than most trailers on the market, so it faces different boons and shortcomings. On one hand, they can configure the parts in any which way they like, but on the other, they're limited by the parts they have. The end result is clearly just a bunch of parts put together in the vague shape of a base. And this is coming from someone who genuinely likes the Legacy Armada base mode. It's nice that they sort of bring things back to basics. At the time, it was a lovely throwback to the classic Medic Bay. Hell, in spite of all the turrets on show, it was actually used as such in the show. Speaking of, the fingers work surprisingly well as guns. Used to think these looked daft, but actually they work reasonably well. I also quite like how the ladder falls out, giving the appearance of more bulk. It's not the best base mode, but it's far from the worst either. However, I just can't escape the feeling that it's a bunch of combiner bits stuck together. This is common for most figures that undergo gut-ification. You can't go ham on the base mode to too extreme a level, lest you end up with the original Armada Prime, where, yay, the base mode is awesome, but f*** the combine mode is shit. Still, I have to call it like I see it. It's a nice thing to have, especially if you primarily display Prime in robot mode and need something to do with the extra bits, but it definitely could have been better. Meanwhile, Cybertron Prime takes a simpler approach. The trailer doesn't particularly do anything separately, save for being able to stand on its own like the classic G1 trailer. I guess this can double as an artillery platform, but it really just seems like traditional storage for me, and nothing particularly interesting. But that's not the main thing this trailer does, oh no. Fold the side panels down and boom! Now is a flying fire engine. Conceptually, this is incredibly stupid. It feels like the kind of thing a kid would come up with as a fan mode, or as a fan design of some Thunderbirds OC thingamajig. And yet, that's kind of what makes it so brilliant. It's so brazen, so daft, and that's why it works so well. And that's not to say there aren't subtleties to appreciate either. The stabilizers becoming missiles is really clever, and I quite like how the wheels now double as turbines. And the guns moving to the side really help fill out the mass, so it doesn't feel like a truck with wings plastered on the sides. Well, he is that, but it feels more purposeful than that. See hybrid style? See where you went wrong? One thing to keep in mind though, the Takara versions has the wings pinned in, while they're just on friction joints on the Hasbro version. Both are plenty solid, and I've never had any trouble with either. Well, I haven't owned this sample for very long, mind you, but the point still stands in regards to the red and black version. So yes, I ultimately have to give the win to Cybertron Prime here. Technically, the Robots in Disguise base mode is more cleverer and more uniquer, but you can't deny that old Galaxy Boy just pulls his idea off better. Daft as the concept is, it goes to show that sometimes less is more. In regards to these two, I always find myself going back to the flight mode on Cybertron Prime, at least on the red and black version I had prior, whereas I think I've only used RID Prime's base mode once in total before working on this video. That should tell you all you need to hear, really. So point 1 for Cybertron Prime, tying both votes. Still got plenty of functionality to get through though, so let's see how things fare further on. You know, it's really funny actually, the last few videos I've done have all been non-traditional reviews, so it's been a really long time since I've done a traditional transformation. It feels kinda nice getting back into the groove of things. But regardless, these two are very much emblematic of their time. You've got the experimental period of Robots in Disguise 2001, and of course the simple but effective period of the Unicron Trilogy. Now of course with Robots in Disguise Prime, we do have to address the elephant in the room. The first thing you gotta do is grab it by the sides and literally remove it from the thing. Sometimes it's really hard to remove. Come on, get out of there! Come on! Jesus, there we go. That was way more difficult than it should have been. But yes, elephant in the room, this is Optimus Prime, and the rest is just a detachable trailer. This style of parts forming is integral to the figure itself, and it might be off-putting for some people. Personally though, I think it's really creative because it allows Optimus Prime to do things that the character isn't really associated with usually. They push the design to its absolute limits, and I really appreciate it for doing that. First thing you want to do is bring these panels around and fold them around the entire robot like so. Same thing on this side, and again, I just wish there'd been some more tabs here. This kind of transformation is really cool because the wheels don't end up being fake, it just shows the mechanical detail underneath. But they just don't tab in, they just sit on the side there. That's like my one biggest gripe with the transformation. I mean, the rest of it is great. Look how the rest transforms. You accordion the whole thing out. It transforms in a spiral, unfolding, and it's just brilliant. Like, look at that shit. That's awesome! With the legs, you want to separate them, rotate the knee swivel around like so, come around to the back and open up the panel, and that'll allow you to bring out the legs like so, and then you collapse it and that locks it in place. Not sure why this doesn't go all the way down and kind of sits a little bit outward there. It's a bit odd, but oh well, I guess. The arms sort of rotate into place on this backwards butterfly like so, which will give you the clearance for the torso a bit later, which functions by pushing the whole thing down and gives you a nice head reveal as well. The arms are also on sliding rails and they pop out and rotate around, which also reveals the fists as you do it. And yes, he does have sliding rails, but I feel these are done quite alright. They've got sort of ratcheted / spring-loaded mechanisms in there, so they don't feel like they're going to break over time, at least compared to a lot of modern instances. And last but not least, don't forget to fold up the light bar like that, so he's got a bit of stuff on the back. It's a really clever transformation, and it integrates the sound chip and speaker into it very well, so it's not sitting around clunkily like, say, Energon Ironhide. It's these kinds of interesting transformations that I wish we'd see more on modern toys, instead of everything being, you know, the same old G1 transformation over and over again. Of course, Cybertron Prime is very much a back-to-basics type of conversion. This was very much a return to the G1 style of transformation, even though it might not seem like it now. Specifically the Power Master conversion, where the torso is formed from the back here. Interestingly, everything functions in large chunks, almost like an upscale deluxe. But it doesn't feel like an upscale deluxe because the ratchets are godly. Sorry, Diamond Bolts, I love ratchet joints, and this is a great example of how to do them right. First thing you want to do is remove the entire trailer assembly. It just kind of pops off like so. And you're left with this big, beefy boy. I like to deal with the windows first, just so that this doesn't fall down by accident while you're transforming it. So the windows are on double joints, they rotate outwards and onto the sides here. Much better than the sliding rails you saw on the hybrid style version. Anyway, they peg together like so, with a nice satisfying click sometimes, or a nice soft click on others. Really depends on the day. After that's done, you take these ratchets and you bring them down like so, come around to the bottom, and these are on double ratchet joints with springs between them so they have enough clearance, so they just move like so into place. Then you can come around here and separate them like so, and fold down the hip skirt. You want to take these two sections and separate them. They're on double hinges that give you plenty of clearance, but you still need a bit more clearance, so you want to bring the elbows down like that. That'll give you even more clearance. So then you can rotate these out to the side, and then peg these into the actual combiner joints. Yeah, these things on the side are combiner joints specifically for Leo Breaker, but what's interesting is that the arms peg into the combiner joint like so. So they make use of existing parts there. And no, I'm not going to discuss Leo Breaker in this review, I don't even own the thing. Maybe one day would be nice, but not for now. Anywho, the last things you want to do is bring the shoulders up like that, and then come around to the back, and you got this lever, and it just brings up the head like so. A dramatic head reveal. I love how both of these have dramatic head reveals. It really plays into the toyetic factor, and I mean that as a compliment, not as an insult. These are toys in the best sense of the word. Also, side note, I'm really glad these stay in place for once, unlike the last time. God, that was stupid. So yeah, these two both have very solid transformations. If we're talking about the build quality and the transformation itself, as in the play feel, I'd probably give it to Cybertron Prime. But overall, simply on the fact that it's more interesting, it's much more clever, the overall score would go to Robots in Disguise Prime. He just does more, the idea is far more interesting. Again, neither of these are bad, it's just he edges out ever so slightly. They're both endlessly fun, and if you're a parts forming hater, you'd probably prefer this one. But for me personally, RID Prime takes the win here. These days, a lot of fans associate 2000's Optimus Primes with their super modes, at least up until the first movie. Why bother with the core robot when the entire point is to combine it with the trailer and create a centerpiece in your childhood collection? Big robot fun, why care about small robots? Well, considering the vast majority of the time the core robot is what you see in the show, you can't just leave it to the wayside. You gotta put in some effort, some pizzazz, lest you end up with Energon's outing. I love you, but let's face it, you got issues. Fortunately, both cases ensured you were getting your money's worth. In both instances, they've guaranteed enough play value could be found with the standalone figure. That being said, from a glance, it's pretty obvious which of the two pulls everything off better. Neither of these are bad, but when it comes to the RID version, yeah, he's got issues. It feels like they had some really good ideas, but they just couldn't get them to work properly. The legs are done extremely well, with extensive layering and wonderful deco choices. I adore how the wheels basically fold out, so technically they're not faux parts. I'm by no means a faux parts hater, but it's a really neat thing to see. Then you've got the silver and the blue and yellow highlights, and my word, this thing goes hard. But then you start to turn it around and you get the same problem the guy had in vehicle mode. There's just no tabs holding this thing together. The panels are just sitting there, hoping the friction keeps it in place. Did they not want the vehicle mode to have any blemishes? A tab on the side wouldn't have been that big an issue. Worst you'd have gotten would have been some whingy fans like the ones who complain about the top part of SS86 Hot Rod. Like, bro, it would have been fine. But then you get further up, and the design really starts to fall apart. I really dislike the way the white sprues are handled. Everything this color is done in comes across as veiny and way too organic. I realized they were just coming off a 5-year streak of bestial designs, but this mechanical detail really feels too fleshy in comparison to everything else, almost looking like the details you'd see when you get up close and personal with a phallus. And I don't mean that as a joke. I mean, look at the insides of the legs. See all this cool hidden detail? Imagine if the rest of the design had stuff like this. Bit of a missed opportunity. The head is okay, I guess. They're trying to go for that rounded aesthetic that many early 2000s designs had, sort of the stuff you'd see in Will Smith's bastardization of Asimov's iRobot.
Oh, that's hot.
I don't know if it completely pulls it off though. Something about it just looks soulless. Maybe it's because the details are a bit soft, not quite as crisp as the other mechanical detail. It is cast on the white sprue after all, just using a blue coat. Possibly it's the fact the eyes are too big, coupled with them being chromed instead of traditional paint. It looks like you've seen some shit. The biggest fumble though, I'd say, is the torso. The design is, on paper, truly wonderful. The windows peeking through the vest with the segmented ab section, it's all the makings of a wonderful Optimus Prime torso. Only for it to be flat as a pancake. Imagine if it had been layered with all the extra details like the show model. That could have been a really nice touch, but unfortunately it's just missing here. It's not helped by the fact it's chrome, and not the durable kind either. Not only is it likely to be scratched when going into vehicle mode and back, but the combined torso pegs directly into it. So you're going to scratch it going to super mode anyway. Even the articulation is weirdly compromised. For the most part, everything you could want is here, including ball-jointed feet and a bloody waist swivel. But then the side skirts don't move out of the way, limiting outward motion on the hips, and there's no thigh swivel, so that becomes weird. Even the ball-jointed fists make no sense because they're surrounded by a ton of forearm kibble. What are you gonna do with that fist? What purpose does it serve? Especially since his only accessory in this mode is a pea shooter. This has got to be one of the most piss-poor accessories I've seen. Given it barely does anything in any of the modes, I gotta wonder what the point is at this stage. Fortunately, he does come with another loadout to make up for it. The foot modules end up doubling as rocket pods, pegging into the shoulders. The connection isn't as solid as I'd like, and I would have preferred an extra locking tab to keep these lined up, but credit where credit is due, this actually goes a long way to improving the design. It balances out the truck details between the legs and shoulders, meaning the attention isn't just drawn to the flat as an ironing board chest. It does become more difficult to pose him as the feet are woefully small, but it's a nice option, and definitely preferable to the standard configuration. This mode isn't hateful, but I definitely feel it's a step behind the fire engine. The detail presents a lot of growing pains, relearning the mechanical detail stylings after years of beasties and relying on G2 reissues to fill the ranks. There's fantastic ideas on show here, and with a few small modifications, this could be a top-tier core robot mode. It's just, in its then current state, I don't really think it hit the mark. Here's a sentence that somehow makes grammatical sense. What even is the English language? Of course, as I said, many of RID Prime's issues were likely growing pains, the design team getting back into the groove of things after leaving the furry fandom. By 2005, they'd well and truly got their muscle memory back, and it's absolutely clear with Cybertron Prime. No more aesthetic dissonance, no more oddities or clashes. This design comes into its own with a newfound consistency and class, even more so than his Unicron Trilogy predecessors. The torso provides probably the first big example of G1 but stylized, as everything is here, but in a newfound alien look. You've got the iconic angular torso pulling a sort of inverse of the RID version, but now in this crisp, transparent blue. The white stripes, grille, yellow light hip skirts, and blue perineum are all here from the G1 Classic, but with sharp new angles and layering effects. You'd expect the silver to seem boring, as it's getting a bit close to Games Workshop grey, but it pulls above with a lighter shade just barely. And even then, it's not in large enough quantities where it would seem overbearing. You quickly stop focusing on it too once you get to these big, meaty clompers. I'm not sure if this metallic blue is exclusive to the Takara version, or if both presented, but either way, it's incredibly lush. Not quite as shiny as the hybrid style, but still enough to look gorgeous. They have some pretty nice detail on show too, almost like it was ripped straight from the cybernetic space cube. Interestingly, the side profile actually looks sexier than the front. Part of that could be thanks to the visible combiner clips for the vehicle mode, which are kind of annoying, but still perfectly understandable. Those tend to get ignored as well once you're hit with the awesome silver kneecaps. Lovely bit of detail, and actually the main point of difference in this mode between Hasbro and Takara releases. The Hasbro one doesn't go all the way through the middle, so if you're after a specific version, be sure to look out. Of course it's minor, and I don't think it's very consequential anyway, much like the fact the nose is painted on this one, but not on the Hasbro. Okay, I guess? The arms are absolutely gorgeous. The shoulder pad aesthetic works insanely well. They raise the shoulder line and give him a powerful physique. Also helps the shoulder isn't mounted extremely low like the last time I took a look at this character design, but whatever. They great. Love how they get the full feeling from the back. You just know a modern rendition would have left that hollow. They really had a massive budget back then, able to go hard on practically everything except the extra leg cannons. I do wonder about the longevity of these pieces given their friction joints are not ratchets, but almost 2 decades on and I've yet to hear anyone report these failing. Besides, they can't be that much worse than the hybrid style outing, who didn't even last a few months. I also adore the way the forearms work, repurposing the pipes as knuckle dusters. It's stuff like this that really makes me miss the creative aspect of character design in Transformers. Many recent media outings have been very safe. When are we gonna get back to the batshit insane original stuff? The Terrans were a step in the right direction, but I want to see them go further. We really haven't since Robots in Disguise 2015. That's not to say this figure is all new ideas though. This is probably the closest thing to G1 since G2 was around, and as such, they've decided to bring in a Matrix gimmick. No crazy lights and sounds, just a simple opening chest and removable Matrix. This might seem like nothing nowadays, but back then it was quite a big deal. Unfortunately, removing it is a bit of a pain. You can't hold it properly. But unlike most modern examples, this one has the excuse of literally being the first to do it. Or at least one of the first.
Am I a joke to you?
I think we can cut it some slack. The other accessory/gimmick integration involves his gun, which unpegs from the trailer assembly. This one's nothing special, but my word, it is leagues better than the one that came with RID Prime. Really, the only thing I can criticize is the head. Yes, I know it's iconic, but in the configuration that's supposed to go with this loadout, it just looks weird. Primed with mouths have usually been fine, but here it just looks off. Granted, it also looked off in the show, but again, the toy was designed first. They chose to make it look like this. Now, this issue is kind of moot though, considering you can just flip the mouth plate up. Problem solved, right? Well, that's the thing. Because of the mouth plate gimmick, the head ends up being way too big for the body. You've got this huge powerhouse where everything works to convey the size of this lad, and then you get this huge head that makes him seem way smaller than he is. Interestingly, both Hybrid Style and Legends of Cybertron fixed this issue, but because of the faceplate plate gimmick as well as prioritizing supermo proportions, it just doesn't work well. Still, that's really the only thing I can criticize with this. Everything else is done to a high quality level with impeccable build quality, awesome paint, and solid articulation. Yes, you do lose the football joints and waist swivel back from 2001, but unlike RID Prime, he actually has all the bare necessities. Everything functions properly this time, backed by a symphony of wonderful ratchet joints. I love how the front and side skirts actually move out of the way to allow extra motion. It's something that's not even that common nowadays, so kudos. Also, one thing I did notice about this, one thing I forgot to put in the script. Yeah, the outward ratchet only actually goes that far, and that is a bit annoying. I'm willing to cut it some slack because of the age of the figure and because it's got all the basics down pat, compared to Robots in Disguise Prime, who's missing a lot of those basics. But it is something I have to mention. Not enough to bring down the score, but definitely something I have to touch upon. So yes, it should be no surprise which of these two takes the core robot win. RID Prime has the cooler concept, but Cybertron Prime just pulls it off better. And it makes sense, this robot mode comes later in the engineering paradigm. The design team was more sure of themselves. They'd had all of RID and 2 years of the Unicron Trilogy building up to this point. Again, neither of these are bad robot modes. I just think RID is a bit wibbly, all things considered. And with that, god damn it, we're back to a tie again. I guess it all comes down to this, the final countdown. 2 points left. Who's gonna take it? Both of these figures undergo very different conversions. They're both trying to accomplish completely different things. One is simply add a backpack and extend the legs, while the other goes through an entire metamorphosis. They're basically accomplishing different things, so it's a bit difficult to compare the two. Of course, with Robots in Disguise Prime, the first thing you have to do is basically pull it apart in every direction. It's like building one of those rebrickable sets, you gotta take the thing apart first. The next thing you want to do is prepare all of the bits. We'll start off with the feet. You bring up this section here, bring out the shin section here, which we'll tab on later, and then the bottom's a little bit annoying. You have to first rotate the foot up 90 degrees, then rotate the wheels in, then rotate the foot the rest of the way. If you try doing it on its own, the feet just won't actually move. They get stuck because of that tab there, and because of the way the rest of the foot works. I don't know why it does that. It's very weird. But as Emgo would say, second verse, same as the first. Now these bits don't do anything, they just remain as is, but the arm pieces do. These essentially untab in these 3 places here and then fold in on themselves. They're basically folding inside out, ironically kinda like the titanium version with the legs. So you do get a bit of that DNA carried over there, but yeah, basically folds inside out. And of course you don't need to orient the guns in any way because they're already the way they are, compared to the base mode at least. And now that we've got everything done, we can basically combine it all. You want to take the foot there, and there's a nice big old hole there to peg into that peg inside there. Gets in there nice and solidly. Might not seem like it at first, but it does get in there. And once it gets in there, you can then peg that in. And a nice old solid foot like so. Same on the other side. Yes, some modern engineering could improve it, but it's alright for now. Let me just plonk him down. Might start off with the arms before we do the rest of the torso, just to make it a bit easier. Pull out the arms like so. That will allow you to peg them onto the shoulders like so. The connection's regrettably not as sturdy as I'd like, but it does well enough. And then you can bring them back in almost all of the way. Not all the way, because then there won't be any clearance, but most of the way at least. The fists attach basically the way you'd expect. They get in there pretty tightly as well. They're pretty sturdy. And they look long now, but they'll look better later. And then this is the only real part I have any gripes with. You want to bring this up just enough so that the head is no longer there. So not all the way up like that, but just half the way, really. And that's when you bring in this big section. And you can pretty much tell how it's supposed to transform, but you have to bring the light bars back at the back there so we got more clearance. Then it's really just plonk this on the top with the 2 pegs, rotate this 90 degrees, which will then let you move it on a separate joint there, and rotate it all the way around the back, like so. It protrudes out a bit, so you're gonna have to take this bottom bit and actually rotate it in, and then that'll give enough clearance for the ground. Clearance for the ground? Bit of a weird statement. Anywho, the reason the chrome's all scuffed up is because we've got 2 pegs here, and that actually pegs into the chrome. Not a great design in the modern era, but for the time I suppose it was fine. Anywho, last thing you want to do is make sure the ear spikes are up, and I suppose straighten out this to the extent that you want it to. It can be adjusted. And yeah, that is RID Optimus Prime. In the mode most people remember him for. In the mode that looks like a bloody fire officer. and he's just as imposing as he should be. A couple of quirky bits here and there, but all things considered, it's remarkably unique and remarkably fun. Cybertron Prime is a much simpler beast. You are essentially adding a backpack to him. He's not combining so much as his powering up with a jetpack. And sometimes that's all you need, and he does it very well, and it is very fun to do. In fact, I'd say it's a bit more fun than the Robots in Disguise version. Well, fun, at least. The only real preparation you need to do for the jetpack is remove the 2 feet sections, and then it's ready to go. And the only real transformation Prime does is rotate these feet forward. This is why it's on a double hinge along with a spring, so that it can stretch around and actually fit in place there. And the toe even folds flush with the rest of it. That is pretty clever if you ask me. It's very simple, but it's a very nice transformation. Doesn't do much, but it's a great use of mass. Again though, I'm not really a fan of those spring-loaded wheels. I gotta wonder for the longevity of this thing. This one's been kept in good nick, but I don't know about other copies. Anywho, you take these 2 bits and you separate them, and because this guy is a big motherfucker, he needs heel spurs. So they just peg into the 2 slots at the back there, and you rotate the gun forward and it clicks into place, and they rotate around. But in the end, that's how it works. And of course, you can probably guess how this transforms. It opens up at the back here. You rotate it around into place so that the wheels are facing the top, and so that from the front you can see all of that lovely detail, and also have the guns at the bottom so they can sling under the forearms. And what's really nice is that even back then they had these wonderful shoulder straps. They just unpeg from there, and then the whole thing slots in, just like a backpack. It doesn't cheat. It doesn't just stick into the back. It actually slots under the shoulders. It's really good, and it even locks in place together. Really feels like what they're trying to convey. And then from there, you just kind of bring the guns around as you see it fit. And for the faceplate, you've got a lever at the back that folds that up, and then you're supposed to bring out the ears, and as you do that, and then you start playing whatever theme song you got at the time. Whatever song from the OST you so desire. So yeah, he is a very simple beast, but he is incredibly effective. Every part is just a joy to go through, mostly because everything has so much hardware in it. It's just a joy to move in every way. So it's really difficult to compare these two, and please ignore the change in lighting. I had to do this the next day because the rain settled in and it was way too loud to record the rest of it. So yeah. Oh god. Oh, it's raining again. Yeah, the shit was so torrential that it ended up flooding the airport. But yeah, these two are really difficult to compare because you got a complete metamorphosis, a complete reinvention, the most batshit gut-high you can imagine with its standalone trailer, and then a simple but effective backpack. They're trying to do different things, but even then, I think I'm gonna have to go for Robots in Disguise. Yes, Cybertron Prime does have better hardware and it's probably a bit more fun, but this guy is just an event. Putting him together is just something else. The way all the parts fit together, especially the feet. Sure, it's got a bit of jank, but it more than makes up for it in batshit insanity. Whereas this guy, yeah, it's just a backpack. It's iconic as f***, but it is just a backpack. So another point to Robots in Disguise, but again, both of these are bloody brilliant. They're both fantastic super mode conversions, probably some of the best the franchise has ever done. It's just by a fraction of a hair, Robots in Disguise takes this win. And I mean a fraction. I mean a millimeter. I mean a nanometer. I mean the smallest measurement you can imagine. Because these are both f***ing ace. And here it is, the embodiment of Transformers in the 2000s. It's everything the franchise was until it was forever changed by the movies. All of the chunk, all of the insanity, all of the gimmicks, these two are the poster children of it all. As for which is the better of the two, well, that's a tough one. Robots in Disguise didn't really have a handbook on how primes were supposed to be designed at the time, so they really just went ahead and made a giant tokusatsu mech. In essence, he's a giant fire officer robot. At least from what I'm seeing, the head is supposed to mimic the helmet right down to the chin straps. The water hoses strap around the torso, and he's even got the massive boots to kick the doors in. They really just slammed Optimus Prime into Fireman Sam, and it works really well. The head sculpt finally comes into its own, blending the traditional Prime ear design with the Fire Officer aesthetic very well. Could use a bit more paint, but at least the eyes are properly proportioned this time. The torso below it is probably the biggest departure Prime has ever seen, even more so than Armada. So many layers and different levels of paint with the crisp orange and powerful gunmetal. You even get yellow highlights that most people don't tend to notice. And on top of that, his nipple opens up to reveal a sculpted matrix of leadership. Bit bland, I'm afraid, but it's still a nice thing to have. The legs end up up blending in with the new parts very well. While you sadly lose the transparent blue peeking in, you gain these wonderful meaty clompers. On paper, these seem like a terrible idea, using only 2 connections that barely seem sturdy. But no, they actually remain super solid. My only real gripe is the panels on the sides here just sticking out. I don't know, they just don't really seem to blend in with the rest of the design. If these could have been hidden entirely, just leaving the truck windows, it would have been perfect. Still, at least you don't have to worry about the weird thighs anymore. They get lost in the rest of the mechanical detail, while the forearms aren't even visible anymore. Talk about a glow up. The part where I feel this design really falls short though would have to be the arms, because although they aren't bad, they end up just being really wibbly and weird. The shoulder pads don't actually go down fully into place, they just sit on top, and it keeps bugging me. I know it's minor, but you got all these empty bits on the sides, and the original shoulder pads still peek through at the bottom. It just feels like a bit more of it could be filled out and it'd be perfect. Well, the shoulder pads anyway. The shoulders themselves? Well, I left it out of the base robot mode because it didn't really bother me then. But here, this issue really does. The ratchets only really have 2 clicks, 45 and 90. Dynamic poses with these arms are basically impossible as a result. And it's a real shame because this is a really dynamic design. And it's pulling its weight in all the other articulation areas. Sure, you lose the waist and ankles and the outward hips are still hella limited, but everything else works fine. By virtue of being tied to an already pretty decent articulated frame, not a lot fails. It's just those damn shoulders bug me a lot. Said shoulders also tend to get stuck on the ladder at the back. No matter what configuration you're in, it always seems to limit the posing just a smidge. Not a deal breaker, but definitely an element of jank derived from the jump between engineering styles. What might be a deal breaker, however, is the massive hollowness you can see from the side, though this one I'm willing to cut more slack. On a more modern figure, perhaps I would have gone harder on shit like this, but here, I don't know, I guess it's fine. From some angles it looks really egregious, but from others you don't even notice it. I do wish this section was more solid though. There's not really many tabs keeping this thing together. Hell, the only thing keeping the torso upright is the fact the head can't fold out fully. And with how wibbly the connection ports are, I'm not sure I trust that system. It's held up after all this time on this copy, but it's hard to say how other copies fare. And word of warning, this is a pretty bad potential failure point on the Encore version. See, Takara decided to reissue this lad a few years back, along with Ultra/God Magnus for the combination ability. Problem is, this thing was rushed out with virtually no quality control implemented. Swapped voice boxes between the two, mold flash galore, misassembly issues, you name it. And to add to all of this, I've had 2 friends of mine who own it personally claim that this joint in the middle failed after a time, essentially gimping the combined mode. One had it happen out of the box, one had it happen a few months later. Let me put it this way, this release was so bad, Takara issued a recall on the release and asked everyone to refund theirs. When was the last time a Transformers toy was recalled? Not even Maga Jazz had that happen. Word to the wise, if you want this figure, hunt down the original. The Encore isn't even any cheaper. If anything, most hells are more expensive. It just isn't worth it. You're getting a worse built toy for extra money just for some pearly white thighs. Just, why would you do that? But as far as the original toy goes, even with all his flaws, he does quite well. He's got jank in a few areas, but he really perfects the fire engine and fire officer aesthetic. It's definitely a design that can be improved upon, perhaps with an eventual HasLab, but as it stands, it's pretty good. He doesn't really do much, save for a cannon mode over the shoulder, but like, does he need to do anything else? He's not a complete brick like the Prime that followed him, and he's not bogged down with gimmicks like the one after that. He's just a solid, well-designed Prime with some decent paint, cool and unique designs, and above all else, an unparalleled heroic presence. They needed a new Optimus Prime to push the franchise into a new age, and although it may not have hit home as much as they'd have liked in Japan, it's definitely made its mark on the Western world. Well, at least that's how TF Wiki says it, as I said before. I still don't know if I necessarily believe that. He keeps showing up on voting polls for Takara Selects and Masterpiece, so he has to be at least somewhat popular. Oh well, I don't properly speak the language yet. Perhaps that's another question for another time. Now, while there were elements with RID Prime that you could point to and designate jank in the trank, Cybertron Prime is a near pristine beast from practically every angle. There's no proportional dissonance, no weird kibble placement, no lacking engineering. He's simply the core robot with an awesome jetpack on the back. But that's the thing. Execution-wise, he's bloody brilliant, but conceptually, he's not all that different from the core robots. The head now features larger ears, for whatever reason, and they look bloody amazing. No wonder they went with this style for the Goo-Op version. And with the backpack, the head doesn't look oversized anymore. You can tell they matched it to the proportions of the combined mode. But like, it's still the same head. You can even access the ears from the standard mode, so there's not much difference here. The shoulders are great, but they're still the same. The added shoulder straps give him some wonderful extra heft, but the chest is still the same. Really, the only only differences are the feet and the backpack. The new feet actually do a good job of extending the proportions, fitting into that long-legged super robot aesthetic. Yes, this comparison isn't specifically with super robots, but they're both anime and you get the idea. Wouldn't bring this up, but I get comments every time I do this. Also, side note, as I forgot to mention it earlier, the guns on the sides are the last major difference between the Hasbro and the Takara versions. The Hasbro one just coats the outside with red, while the Takara one wraps it fully around. Again, not a major difference, so you can see this comparison is still fine. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the feet folding in is an awesome feature. The way the old ones sit flush with the new toes is brilliant, and the blending is impeccable. But again, conceptually, the combining bits only really become the heel spurs. They're not actually contributing much to the combined mode visually. This does lead to one of the most consistent super modes of the trilogy, but I can't help but imagine what these could have done if they'd gone a bit further. Or, I guess I'm not imagining, because they already did that back in 2001. Of course, I have no complaints with the wingspan. Much like the flying truck mode, these look bloody amazing. They were done back in the day when the designers wouldn't gimp the wingspan for the sake of the budget too, so they're really given the width to shine. Everything that worked previously works again here. Sure, I could complain about the hollowness of the back, but that's to facilitate the heel spur storage. Not to mention they're making sure the weight distribution is up to scratch. Despite the size of this bloody thing, it never feels back heavy. In any pose, it feels nice and sturdy, so no problems there. But getting it into a decent pose is a bit difficult due to one simple factor. Take a look at the guns. You'll quickly notice that he never actually holds them. There aren't any handles to do so, you just have to fake it. This seems like a pretty big thing to forget. Holding the guns is supposed to fire. Already the rest of the functionality is here, as the same cyber key powers activate in the same ways, but it just feels wrong without him actually holding onto anything. Of course, this was fixed later on both Guop and Hybrid style, but even with the age of this figure, I think it's a fair assessment to consider this a flaw. Not that it matters though, because that's his only real flaw overall. It's a fantastic finisher to a toy that's been damn good throughout. It's just, again, there's not much to say about it because all of his cool ideas have been done already earlier in the figure's conversion cycle. It's a fantastic mode, but it's also very derivative. And I think that sums up the main difference between these two releases. Robots in Disguise is a release that has a few janky areas, but consistently tries to push the envelope and raise engineering to new heights. It's the big return of vehicular engineering, and it's here to make you proud to be a Transformers fan. On the other side, Cybertron Optimus Prime is probably the closest thing many had to G1 outside of Masterpiece and the soon-to-be-released Classics rendition. If you actually look at how this functions, it's strikingly similar to the Power Master version. And that's not a bad thing, both are bloody fantastic figures. It's just one is bold but slightly wibbly, while the other is safe but expertly crafted. And call it a cop-out, but I respect both outlooks in combined mode. And as such, this section remains a tie. If this is the mode you're getting either of these for, you can't go wrong. They're both wonderful play and display pieces, drawing attention wherever they go. They're a reminder that even though modern toys are bloody fantastic, there's a certain charm of the old that they just don't capture in the same way. Modern toys capture their own, equally brilliant charm, but some toys from this era, well, they're just a little bit special. But if we're going for the overall experience, ultimately the points speak for themselves. When you tally everything up, a clear winner comes to the forefront. These are both fantastic figures worthy of your purchase. But Robots in Disguise just goes that little bit further with its realistic vehicle mode, unhinged engineering, and unique design. Honestly, if we're going purely off nostalgia, I'd probably pick Cybertron Prime. Perhaps it's also a bit of new toy bias, as I'm writing this a lot earlier in the play cycle than I would normally, but examining each individual factor, I cannot deny the scoring. Of course, for the regular review points, I don't think it's fair to give these anything other than the highest score available. We all know these are legendary releases, and just because one is slightly better than the other doesn't mean you shouldn't save up to buy both. This was merely an experiment to see which of these two beloved nostalgic linchpins was the definitive 2000s Optimus Prime. Wasn't really gonna pass up the opportunity to do a project I've wanted to do for 3 or so years when someone basically offered to bankroll it. Yeah, this was meant to be an anniversary special, but it just didn't feel right comparing the red and black version of Cybertron Prime to the standard edition of RID Prime. And then the replacement is broke because they were mold recasts and not the originals. And yeah, that whole project got flushed down the toilet. But years later, I was finally afforded the opportunity to take this idea for a spin. And after everything, yeah, the results make sense. Robots in Disguise kicked off the anime boom we all knew and loved. And I'm extremely glad to finally understand the importance behind this release. Of course, is far from perfect. Perfect score doesn't mean a perfect figure, mind you. Back in the day, I thought upgrading the Robots in Disguise version was a fool's errand. How could they improve it when everything was already this good? With a few more reviews under my belt, however, I'm starting to see a few cracks. Perhaps with some modern engineering, they could improve the torso solidity in both aesthetic and engineering. Maybe they could add tabs where they need to be added, and layer the robot torso to a better level. Perhaps it'll be possible at, say, an unlocked price point that doesn't need to be at retail. What I mean to say is HasLab. If you're developing what you're hinting at, then I eagerly await the results. Your move, Hasbro. You've got your work cut out for you. But as always, fan and public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your stance on the matchup below. Do you prefer the 2001 reinvention with robots in disguise? Or perhaps the return to form with Cybertron? Which show did you prefer overall? Do you think good old Fire Convoy is due for the HasLab treatment? And as always, remember, there's a context for everything. Till next time. Ah, shit. I did an entire video on Cybertron Optimus Prime and didn't make a single "our worlds are in danger" joke. Oh well, maybe next time. Recently I bought a junker Cybertron Optimus Prime to salvage the ears for my Galaxy Force version, which there should be a brand new full review up for today. Thing is, before I sell this off for less than the price of lunch, I thought it'd be cool to compare this to my Takara edition, at least as much as I'm able to show without accessories. Aside from the differences in sound chip languages, not that either of my copies work anyway, the first difference is with the face. Takara has extra paint on the temple of the nose guard, Hasbro doesn't. The leg guns on the Hasbro versions aren't painted as comprehensively when compared to Takara. Hasbro has segmented kneecaps. Takara has fully painted ones. Takara has paint on both sides of the cannons. Hasbro only has it on one side. Hasbro has clips on the wings, while Takara pins them for a more sturdy fit. Hasbro didn't bother painting the back wheels, whereas Takara did. Takara also adds an extra 2 yellow top lights, whereas Hasbro skipped them until the red and black version later. And finally, the Cyber Key has a full gold border around it, whereas Hasbro is just transparent blue. The matrices are the same though. Honestly, you can go for either. Both are peak, so whatever you end up with, you're getting something brilliant. Redecos. They've always been a part of Transformers. They're always going to be a part of Transformers. Hell, if you really think about it, the vast majority of G1 was built on redecos, picking and choosing which Diaclone versions they wanted. It's interesting to see how redecos are handled throughout the years. Although they've existed since the dawn of the franchise, they didn't really go crazy until the Aaron Archer era, with painted ladders and vehicles. Then you got fun publications with their immense price tags. Then they kick the bucket, then Hasbro takes up the mantle with Generation Selects. Then fans complain Selects aren't available in physical stores because nobody wants to stock brown paper boxes, and now we're here with store exclusives. As the franchise has gotten older, ire against redecos has proportionally increased. Why should Windsweeper be a redeco? Shouldn't he deserve his own molds? Shouldn't he not be packaged with this piece of shit? Why is Cannibal a retool with faux shoulder doors? Faux shoulder doors? Why wouldn't you give Medics a new mold? His Medics! Medics! Come on! Okay, for all my sarcasm, sometimes I do get it. Admittedly, I'm a little disappointed in the lack of new tooling on the upcoming Slipstream. Having things be a retool or redeco can be pretty disappointing. However, I don't think we're in a bad position right now. One thing I love doing when reviewing figures is looking back at the history of release strategies and pinpoint where things are right now. Often I've been called out for being too lenient on modern Transformers, lacking the edge I used to. But that's because I genuinely believe we're in a golden age of toys at the moment. Compared to what's come before, the quality is off the chain. So, to put it into perspective, it might be good to go back in time and re-examine a redeco practice that wasn't as inspired. Things weren't always the way they are now. They weren't bad necessarily, but you can definitely see where things have improved since. Greetings, Cybertronians. I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to Cybertron Leader Class Galaxy Force Optimus Prime. Once again, not to be confused with Galaxy Force Leader Class Optimus Prime, because again, Cybertron's original name in Japan was Galaxy Force, and they renamed this redeco Galaxy Force Optimus Prime. Yeah, maybe not the best name to choose for a figure like this. Feels like the time they called Ratchet Rescue Robo just so their competitors couldn't use the trademark for the Machine Robo game. Oh, hello, painted ladder again. God, I love Aaron Archer. For the toys, not the copyright fuckery. So the question remains, what is Galaxy Force Prime exactly? Well, the thing about retailers is, they're impatient. They don't want the same toy line on store shelves in perpetuity, with a few exceptions. It's why Hasbro keeps renaming the toy line each year, and is basically forced to make a new trilogy every so often. Yeah, according to the Leak Squad, the design team didn't want to end Legacy and rename everything, but retailers wanted a new case assortment and all that shit. that. I can't verify this information specifically, as trawling through TFW is, well, very difficult, but apparently that's the reason. The same reason is why kid-centric toy lines add on a suffix whenever it enters a new year. Robots in Disguise Combiner Force, Cyberverse Power of the Spark, hell, Cyberverse got it twice with Bumblebee Adventures. Though apparently the last one coincided with a show name change so they could count it as a separate production and pay the animation team less. Isn't the animation industry wonderful? Cybertron was one of the many lines to go through this metamorphosis, featuring the Primus Unleashed subline, coinciding with the end of the show and the arrival of the Chonky Boy. Thing is, far as I'm aware, none of these redecos actually ended up in the show itself. It makes sense when you think about it. Galaxy Force aired its final episode on December 31st, 2005 in Japan, and the Primus Unleashed line wouldn't make it onto store shelves until late 2006, even if Hasbro had any say in how the show was produced over at Gonzo Animation, which I seriously doubt they did. The episodes were basically all done by the time these redecos went into production. As such, it's clear this range exists purely to have more product on store shelves. Yes, that's basically what every toy line on the planet exists to do, but this more so than most. And of course, being one of the most well-regarded Optimus Primes of the time, it was inevitable to push out another version just so retailers can go, oh look, a new Optimus Prime, Optimus Prime. Canonically, this is supposed to be a post-war Optimus, after Galvatron kicked the bucket and pieces finally been restored to the galaxy, and Kicker is there also. In practice, this is basically Cybertron Optimus Prime with all the blue parts swapped out for charcoal. There are subtleties on show, but this is it for the most part. Now, this might seem like a simple change, but it can have drastic consequences on the figure if done improperly. It's why color theory exists in the first place, and why everyone hates Victorion but loves Megatronia. Case in point, the original Cybertron Prime is a wonderful balance of red, blue, and silver. Red is the dominant color on show, but the blue peeks through and breaks it up sufficiently between the opaque and clear plastic. It gives it a real mean feeling, pushing through the toyetic nature of the design and drawing your eye to key details like the bull bar assembly and the piercing windows. It's a masterclass of deco design that elevates Kunihiro's work to new heights. But what happens when you swap out a striking color for a more muted one? The black they've chosen isn't exactly the son of a pitch. It's smoky and less of a salient feature. This can work reasonably well if it's a base tone, picked out with more dynamic highlights. At least I think it can. I'm not a color theorist, I'm just rounding off how I rationalize it. Point is though, that's not how it's done here. The purpose of the blue was to break up the red, but when you switch that out for a color that doesn't achieve that purpose, the red really overpowers the thing. It goes from a monolithic construct of purpose and mission to a sea of red plastic where all the details kind of blur together. The detail doesn't change from the original, it's still as good as it's always been. I mean, this is the mold that somehow managed to make the G1 trailer stripe into a gear assembly. That awesomeness is still mostly on show, but a lot of it just doesn't come across as well. All of this is amplified with a somewhat confusing choice of window swapping. The original had opaque blue assemblies and clear blue windows, so I guess the deco designer extrapolated that logic to make the windows on this smoky clear plastic. Think Coca-Cola Starscream from Hobby or New Age. Though much like the idea those figures are homaging, the interest ends up crumbling to dust. What was once an almost neon design statement that really emphasized the angular nature of the front now just looks bland. Like this is almost a prototype of the final design. And given the siren lights are on the same sprue, they end up looking like doubles of the transformation hinges, making this whole top section seem messy, not just in comparison, but as its own standalone thing. At least with the original they could be ignored. This ends up feeling like the hybrid style version, where it sticks out like a sore thumb. It's one of those deco choices that has no consideration for the original intent. They could have picked any other color, but they chose the blandest. But hey, at least they brought back the yellow lights that were absent from the Hasbro version of the original. Yay! Beyond that, there's oddities that don't bring down the experience per se, but they are somewhat weird. The wheel paint is swapped out for a dull silver, which I suppose is fine, but compared to the gorgeous shades of the original bronze, it doesn't make much sense. And the thing is, the bronze is present elsewhere on the figure. It makes itself known on the other side rocket pod that is also his other more bigger gun. I actually really like this change. It feels a bit more vibrant with the extra blue on show. Never realized this, by the way. The original Hasbro version only has painting on the outside of the cannons, while the Takara one has it on the inside too. Didn't realize until I was writing the script. Guess it's another cool feature to add to the pile. The Cyber Key is also categorically better than the Hasbro version, bringing back the gold trim from the Takara release, much like the yellow lights. Of course, I don't know where my copy's gotten to, so I'll just be using the regular one. But you get the idea. It's a nice touch, but it does make you wonder why they didn't put that budget back into the core figure itself. The return of the subtle bells and whistles feel nice, but it's sort of like the deco designer was missing the forest for the trees. Now, all of this is not to say the figure is bad by any means. I realize that due to the nature of this review, comparing what's better and what's worse, it's going to go over a lot of things that are categorically inferior. It's important to note, however, that the functionality is still as awesome as it ever was. He still carries a similar, albeit slightly diminished, powerful presence. Posing the cannons with those clickety ratchet joints is still an absolute joy. It's still pure bliss to roll this mechanical monolith across the table, even if the lack of pins on the Hasbro version make it a bit wobbly on the sides. In fact, getting him into flight mode, a good chunk of my issues aren't so egregious anymore. Revealing the hidden black in the middle does a lot to assist the breakup of the design, outlining the red wings and cab around a solid darker core. Will say though, the smaller guns sort of blend into the design now that they're cast in red, with bronze paint coating instead. I do love the bronze paint, but that base red doesn't quite achieve that extra bit of breakup, especially against the black. But I mean, come on, this has got to be one of the most swooshable Transformers ever put to plastic. Unicron Trilogy was on some other shit, man. It's still the same mold at its core, all of that charm carries over to the new version. I don't want you to think this is a bad vehicle mode, because it isn't. It's just that compared to the god tier brilliance of the original, yes, it is a step down. The changes made here clearly haven't had much consideration put into them. It's a redeco for the sake of making a redeco, and of all the choices they could have made, they didn't exactly pick the best one. There is one part where I think they improved on the original, however, the standalone cab. This still isn't a great mode to display in unless you have specific nostalgia for the Legends version, but there is one thing that's changed for the better. Because the thighs are now also cast in black, this mode looks a lot more cohesive. The waist section blends in far more seamlessly into everything else, and you have much more clearly defined color blocks of red and black. Said color blocks are of course less striking than the original, but a dub is a dub is a dub. We take those. Of course, I do find it funny that the Legends version took this idea and just threw it out, bringing back the oh so funny lack of cohesion. Maybe this choice was a budgetary constraint in retrospect, and the cohesion in vehicle mode is just a coinkydink. Speaking of, another thing I missed last time, the back wheels also aren't painted on the Hasbro version. Again, not something I noticed until writing this. In my defense though, I'm in a weird position of having the Takara version of one, but the Hasbro version of the other. I don't know, shit's weird, and I'm just trying to make it work. Anywho, since we've already covered the dimensions and conversion last time we tackled this mold, let's just move on. In the words of T-Fan page 101, in robot mode, yeah, maybe the added vehicle cohesion was a mistake. While the vehicle mode suffered greatly from the overabundance of red, Peacemaker Optimus's robot mode does the exact opposite. The red takes way too much of a back seat. So, what exactly is contributing to this overbearing dissonance? Well, taking a look at the original, you can see a lot of the design is broken up with other colors. You've got the grey underskeleton bleeding through the biceps and thighs, and even the fingers are a different color. When you swap that out for black, once again the aesthetic balance is thrown right off. Then you combine it with the shade itself. As mentioned earlier, they've chosen a specifically smoky shade rather than a pitch black. In vehicle mode, it couldn't really be seen well, but in robot configuration, you realize this thing really looks muted and dull. The black doesn't have the vibrancy it should, all because Hasbro didn't want to pay Anish Kapoor apparently. When you combine this lackluster shade with a shift in balance, you end up with a figure that almost seems embarrassed with its mechanical detail. It doesn't seem to want to flaunt it. Again, everything from the original is still here, but none of it comes across. And the thing is, they could have done better, and I know this because they actually did. The Legends version comes in the clutch with both a darker shade and extra highlights to pick out the thighs. This is what the leader should have been. It even manages to do the cyber key sigils better. These actually pop, while on the leader, they just blend into the red. For those wondering what these are, probably because they haven't seen the show, they're the 4 planet logos, done in gold and silver. The silver ones kinda stand out though, not as much as the Legends version, but the gold just fades into the background. I'm guessing it's because it gets lost next to the smoky windows, but it's hard to tell because, well, it's so hard to see. Conceptually, this deco choice should work on paper, but in practice, it just doesn't. Would have just taken an Autobot symbol over this shit. And in terms of deco choices that don't work on a conceptual level either, god, the unmasked loadout looks shit. Admittedly, I've never been a fan of the original version either, but at least with that you could tell the points with the chin and nose guards. At least they functioned, even if the Hasbro version got rid of the nose. But here, it's all gone. Nothing's picked out, so it just looks like several malformed scars on the inside of the helmets. He looks like the Joker without makeup in that one scene from The Dark Knight, where everyone's too afraid to look at him out of both disgust and misguided respect for what they thought was service in the line of duty. And I don't think that's the intent here. Sure, this is a post-service Prime, but it's clear this is just budget reallocation. Question is, reallocated to where? It's not like anything else has been given paint outside of maybe the headlights. Both tampograph systems use 2 layers, and everything else uses equal or even less paint. I realize that budgets can change from year to year, and the market is a fickle thing. It's why Hasbro deliberately did Swoop last in the SS86 Dinobots, in case they ran out of money and had to slash the budget on the last one. Swoop is the simplest, so logically it makes sense. But given it's just over a year between releases for this one, dealing with a redeco instead of a new mold, and way back in 2006 when budgets were much higher than they are now, I don't think I can give this one some slack. Ugh, enough looking at this fugly bastard. Let me just... there we go. Again, I don't want to make it seem like this is the worst thing ever. Categorically, it's the same mold again. The play features are just as fun as the original and is still the same chunkster he always was. There's a certain hand feel with this fella that just can't be understood without experiencing it in person, which seems to be a running theme for the designer. And to reiterate, that feel hasn't been lost from the original deco. To make it abundantly clear, it's still the same top tier mold. It's just... this deco does it no favors. Though, surprisingly, there's one thing that does. That is, does do it a favor. When you pop this guy into super mode, this actually works a lot better. It's still not on the same level as the original, but this genuinely brings the vibe a lot more. You can tell from the way this is laid out that this mode was the primary intent. And I mean, sure thing, this is the mode most associated with this mold. It's the most iconic, it holds the most important scenes, and all of the combinations are based around it. The arms that seemed really out of place now sit atop a backdrop of grey railguns and red wings, so they no longer look out of place. Similarly with the legs, the red cannons do a lot to break up the monotonous charcoal. I also much prefer the bronze they chose here. It's a nice little addition. Can't say the same for the lack of paint outside the cannons, though that's a Hasbro versus Takara thing, so I can't fault it too much. I also adore the red highlights at the front of the cannons too. It's something I'd have loved to have seen on the other versions, though that would clash with the other aesthetics, so maybe best to be left with wishful thinking. So basically, if this is the mode you're getting it for, or I guess this in the chicken truck lane mode, it's cromulent. It lacks the sheer presence of the original, mostly because it ignores all of the subtleties it was known for, but it's okay, I guess. Thing is, if you're getting this as a substitute because it's cheap, I'm not sure that's a good idea. For years, this was my Cybertron Optimus Prime. And yeah, for a time, I did love it. I cherished the idea of me actually owning a piece of 2000s Transformers history. However, in time, reality started to settle in. Something always seemed off about him. He was never a bad figure, but he didn't really live up to the original idea. It's only after I was gifted the original that I truly understood what I was missing, what they failed to carry over. It's with this experience that I can give one key piece of advice. Buy this deco because you want it specifically, not because you're settling. Don't buy it because it's cheap or because it's accessible or because it's generally easier. Buy it because you want it. If you don't really, save up the extra cash and go for the original. I realize that's big words coming from someone who was technically paid to take one, but chances are I would have saved up and gotten the original anyway, in whatever alternate timeline where I wasn't so fortunate. Point is, buy what you really want to buy, not what's easier to buy. You have your whole life to collect the figures you want. Don't settle for less. Though, how does this circle back to the ideology of redecos? Well, let's place this in the context of the redecos we get these days. I cannot stress enough that this figure is still decent in its own right. It might not seem like that in the context of this review, focusing primarily on the changes, but everything that was good with the construction of the original still applies here. With that said, it's also clear this is a redeco derived from corporate's desire to simply put more product on shelves. Much like the vast majority of Primus Unleashed, the choices are ultimately just there so Hasbro can tick a box. Instead of doing something unique and interesting, it's slapdash and poorly thought out. There are some neat ideas on show, but they all seem like they're in spite of corporate's efforts, not because of them. And yes, it is important to note that these redecos did make these figures more accessible to a new group of kids. Especially after the show ended and it was probably entering reruns, it was an easy way to access the characters seen in the show, albeit in slightly different decos. Doesn't mean it can't be done well though. Hasbro's redeco game back then could be really good. It's just that a lot of the time they took the easy route. Now compare that to the redecos we get these days. Well, least focusing on mainline. Earthspark is another story, but let's ignore that. The desire to release product is still there. Hell, we're getting more products now than ever. Thing is, it's spearheaded by a design team that deeply cares about the pedigree of the franchise. Sure, they're derivative. It's been a long time since we got redecos that really went out there and did something new, with the exception of the parts forming buddies. But each redeco and retool they put out has intent behind it. Each which release appeals to someone specifically, least compared to, oh, let's just swap out the sprues and call it a day. You know, I was actually talking about this video, and my friend Rhymesworth a Dime actually pointed out something interesting. Technically, I've made this video before on a very similar topic. The old Last Night Reveal the Shield Optimus Prime is very much in the same vein, except on exclusives as opposed to just regular redecos. But it's the same thing until recently, both exclusives and redecos were just kinda pulled out of corporate's ass. Whereas nowadays, it's very different. Of course, not every redeco hits as hard as it should. As I said earlier, I'm still disappointed with the upcoming Slipstream, and hell, this can even backfire. For instance, I have a sneaking suspicion Galaxy Force Prime is gonna be the leader for the Walmart Cybertron capsule next year. We know a few of the smaller price points, but the leader still remains a mystery, and what better time to release Guop? For all his backlash, a good chunk of people still really want him, and why not spice things up with a new redeco instead of doing the old Siege version? Seems like an easy shoo-in for me, even if it probably won't turn out that great, as seen with my qualms with the original. But my point is still there, at least there's an intent behind the redeco. At least it's not just product for the sake of product. If this happens, at least someone will have sat down and asked, how can we make something that makes sense? Instead of, how can we sucker kids out of more hard-earned cash? Modern redecos are in a good place. Might not be ideal in some places, but let's face it could be a lot worse. But as always, fandom public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your thoughts on lazy or brilliant redecos below. Did you grow up with this figure? Did it ever disappoint you, or was it a childhood classic? What's your stance on the current state of redecos? Will I remember to make an "our worlds are in danger" joke before the end of the video? Apparently not, so I guess that's twice now. Ah well, third time's the charm. Anywho, as always, remember, there's a context for everything. Till next time. In the long past year of 2005, I think it was safe to say that our worlds were in danger. It's a bit hard to tell if Transformers Cybertron was a phenomenon or not. I know a lot of Transformers fans like it, but as for its popularity within the greater landscape, not so sure. I wasn't there, I can't say, I don't have the memories of it. But there is one thing you can say for certain. The toys were great. I mean, what was there to say? They were big, they were chunky, they were fun, they had the best parts of all the gimmicks from the previous toy lines, but they had articulation to back it up. We had so many classics from that era, but one thing we have to remember that it did was introduce us to the wonderful world of Legends class. Legends of Cybertron, shrunken down versions of the full-scale toys. And because the full-scale toys were so simple, it was a pretty easy thing to do. And no toys from that line are more famous than the titular Optimus Prime. In vehicle mode, this is basically a shrunken down version of the larger leader figure, with the big difference being it does not come with the backpack / trailer assembly, which of course kind of makes sense given the price point. They retailed for around 5 or 7 Aussie dollary dues back in the day, so kind of including a trailer would have been a bit silly. And I mean, I guess there's always the hybrid style version if you want the trailer, even though it's complete dog shit. Okay, not complete dog shit, but definitely a very flawed figure. We'll say they've done a fantastic job bringing this to this price point. Not all the figures made the jump pretty well, but these ones did. Rather than being shrunken down versions of the characters, back in Legends of Cybertron, the first ever proper Legends series, the progenitor to the Legend scale we know today. These are all shrunken down versions of the toys, so everything is pretty much identical to the larger version. Minus combining functionality, of course you can't really do that, which, bit of a shame, but I get it. That wouldn't become a thing until Avenge of the Fallen. Still, this guy is done very well. Of course you don't get the lights at the front here, but most of the details are picked out. The bumper's there, no silver paint, although I think the Takara version might have some, I'll have to double check that. But the white stripe is there and it's done very nicely, and of course the windows are painted. Actually, this entire section is painted. In fact, interestingly, there is no red plastic on this. It's entirely red paint, and that is a very difficult thing to do. You have to do it right, and a lot of toys just don't. But this is a good instance where they did do it very well, because the red is super durable. Unfortunately, that scratching came with the figure. It was on my copy when I bought it. I didn't own this as a kid, unfortunately. I got it way later, and it already had that scratch on it, but that's okay, that's okay. The side looks pretty clean. Unfortunately, the windows don't fold out to the sides like the leader version, but I'm not really expecting it on a figure this small. You know, what can you really do? The back section works about as well as you'd expect. It actually looks a bit cleaner given the size of it. Since everything's shrunken down, this whole hip assembly section that would normally be kind of out of place on the larger version, it looks alright here. You do miss a lot of the extra details like the silver, because now it's just a plain block of yellow, but yeah, what can I say? It's just a nice little version of the larger figure. And of course, they didn't stop there. We had to get redecos. For those who've joined this channel sometime this year, you'll recognize this as the Galaxy Force redeco. Not the Takara redeco, the Cybertron Galaxy Force redeco, because naming sucks. And this is a big reason as to why I criticized it so heavily. There's a big difference in the plastic coloring. Most of it's still the same. You've got all the red here, the windows are black instead of that. You've actually got silver on the outside of the fists now, which wasn't a thing on the original, which I do quite like. And of course, all 4 symbols are now done in silver instead of gold and silver, but they kind of stand out a bit more. Interesting thing, the diagonal is actually reversed when compared to the leader class version. Yeah, no, they're in the opposite direction on that one. They went this way for some reason, I don't know why. Kinda came out around the same time, but what can you do? Of course, this section here stands out a little bit more because now it's painted in silver. My guess is they just used the same paint cutouts as the original, so they just wanted to save cash. Same with the blue here, but I actually prefer this to the full-sized figure. But the big difference, and the one I will absolutely applaud, is the choice of black. You remember on the full-sized figure they chose a smoky black, whereas here it's completely pitch, which I absolutely adore. It's just a fantastic choice. The red and black pops here way more than it does on the original figure. Also, the red's a lot more vibrant as well, but it doesn't really change much. But of course, 2 redecos isn't enough because they have to milk this to the absolute shit. And I don't mean that as an insult, it is a brilliant little Legends mold, so of course it got redecos. This is Universe 2008 Hot Zone, because apparently they didn't have the trademark for it. Painted in Hotspot's colors with no combining functionality. Oh well, wasn't the only combiner that got a redeco from this. I mean, Menasor got it as well. Pretty much the same thing here. Basically what you'd expect, a lovely blue and red redeco of this. Of course, Hot Zone wasn't sold on his own, he was sold in a multi-pack, and I don't own any of the other figures in the multi-pack. Yeah, I just sort of came across him on his own on Marketplace, and I'm happy to just have him. But hey, if I ever want to track down the rest of them, I can't imagine it'll be that difficult. The paint layout is the same on here, just done in black. They've actually changed the paint layout at the front, so it's now done completely in silver. Though again, there's no paint on the front whatsoever, which, it's fine. One thing I forgot to mention earlier though, these 2 wheels are real, but this one's actually fake. It's painted black and silver to mimic the real wheel, but actually it's just sitting off the ground a little bit, so it never touches. I kinda get it, budgeting-wise, it all makes sense. One thing I do find funny is that the entire kneecap is painted. Might not seem like much, but on the other 2 versions, you can see the bottom part isn't actually. Kinda just stops there, whereas Hot Zone goes all the way. Kinda like that. I kinda like that it's a neat little feature. And I do really like this redeco. Sure, the Autobot symbol could not be lopsided there, but I guess it'll work a bit better in robot mode when it's realigned better. Interestingly, the vehicle mode windows are black, whereas the robot windows are silver, I'm guessing to mimic some of the G1 toy details. Which, you know, is a nice little feature, nice little quirks you get to appreciate with this toy. Might actually get the repro labels for this later, because I do really like this. It's a nice little novelty. Hey, DrLockdown from the future here. I came to realize they weren't actually producing the set anymore, so once it sold out, that was basically it. So I took a chance and ended up ordering the Toy Hack set. And I do quite like it. The extra little details they've got in the vehicle mode are quite nice. I do find the flames on the side kind of funny because, you know, it just comes on the legs and it's just so small. But it is accurate to the G1 toy, so I get why it's there. I adore how it looks in robot mode with the extra chest details and the extra warning stripes. Might be the only hotspot I genuinely like. I've just never been that into the protector bots. But this really does it for me. It's adorable and done really well. Good on you, Toy Hacks. I can't get my thumb in frame. But that's not the only redeco of this mold I have. You may recall in the original video I mentioned that I had a knockoff of the original, and that was my childhood copy, but I never could find it years later. Well, after moving, I eventually did find it, and oh god, my shitty paint job for when I was 10, dear gods. Yeah, 10-year-old DrLockdown was pretty shit. They just spray painted gold all over it, and then put a Warhammer wash and called it a day. This is complete and utter dog shit, but it is a nice trip down memory lane. Annoyingly, the head never pushed down on this knockoff, and it was also a model kit, you had to build it yourself. But I really liked it as a kid, and I just thought I'd show it off with the rest of it. It's a very nice truck mode, and I'm very glad to have all of these today. Now, size-wise, the mold is roughly 2.2 centimeters wide, 2.5 centimeters tall, and 11 centimeters long. And for size comparisons, here he is next to a standard Legion figure, which I guess he sort of is, a standard Core Class figure, a standard modern Micromaster, a standard modern Minicon, a not-so-standard Lego minifigure, and Crumbs. Now, being a shrunken-down version of the larger toy, the transformation is basically identical. Kinda makes it a bit like the smallest transforming collection, which is something I kind of appreciate. I find it's best to bring the front section up first so you get a bit more clearance, then separate it like so. It's actually best to rotate these before you move, and there's a specific reason why. When you rotate it out that way, it means you won't scratch the wheel, which you can see on this copy of Hot Zone. It kinda has happened. It's clear the previous owner didn't really account for the clearance there. So when you bring this down first and rotate it around, then rotate it into place, doesn't end up scratching the sides. You can then bring down the shoulders however you like. Bring down the legs, bring down the waist section. There's no torso transformation here, unfortunately. Would have been nice to see, but again, this thing is f***ing tiny. And you see how poorly it was handled on the hybrid style version, so no thank you. These are on double hinges instead of the stretchy hinges. And pull up that head, probably f*** up my fingernails at the process. Ah! There we go. And, yeah, this is fantastic. It's just a smaller version of the leader class figure. None of the extra bells and whistles and weird complicated bits that just make it a chore to handle like the hybrid style version. It's just the leader class shrunken down with all the beautiful simplicity intact. Again, it's a real risky move painting all the red parts instead of using solid red plastic. And it really paid off. It makes this figure feel way more premium than it actually is. It's a sort of premium feel that you just don't get with a lot of modern Legion class figures. At least, well, not without toy hacks. Head sculpt is captured pretty well. It's really simplified and a bit difficult to see, but on a figure this small, it doesn't really matter. The torso is absolutely gorgeous. It's not the same shade as the original leader, but it still does it really well. Interestingly, they've missed the ab section. There's no silver paint to replicate the grey plastic, but they have done the white on the sides, and it really brings it to life. The shoulders are done really well, even though the white stripe doesn't continue all the way to the back, but that section is really tiny, so I can understand why it's difficult to paint it. So no harm, no foul. I actually really like this waist section being done in blue as opposed to being done in grey with a blue stripe down the middle. If I had to criticize one thing, the yellow is a bit wispy. It could have used another coat. But you gotta remember, yellow is a really hard color to do, and it's being done on blue plastic, a really dark color. So they've probably done a bunch of coats already. It's alright for what it is. We're not dealing with Zeta levels of bullshit here. Same thing with the kneecaps. I kind of prefer the silver of the original, but you do get the lovely silver on the thighs, which is just gorgeous. Interestingly, the thighs are really long compared to the original, but it's alright, works okay. Of course, given its small size, the back sections are really, really hollow in comparison to the original being filled in. But I mean, it's a Legends figure. What you gonna do? The only thing I could really criticize with this is the articulation, which is a bit lacking. Nothing on the heads, the shoulder flaps move up and down, but really nothing in the shoulders. Just an elbow bend, nothing else there. You have ball jointed hips that go up, but they don't really go out because they don't have the clearance on the side. The wheels don't move out like the leader class version, and they are further back, but they jut out just enough where you don't get anything. And nothing back either, so really you just get a front kick and that's it. And nothing else in the legs, that is basically it. Of course, there's basically no combining functionality, but again, $5 to $7 figure, what you gonna do? I don't actually know what the price of this figure was when it first released. I know that the 07 Legends were about $7, so I can compare that. But this might have been $5 when it first released. I don't know, I'm just guessing. Can't have been that much, and even by $10 Modern Legion standards, it's still pretty good. It's held up remarkably well. It feels very premium. It feels like they put a lot of effort into it. Not all of the Legends of Cybertron figures were done that great, but this was one of the greats. And that high quality continues with the Galaxy Force version. Again, having the darker blacks just really brings this figure to life. Also the change in balance as well. You've got a lot less red. It just really gives this figure a new vibe. And of course, again, the kneecaps look a lot better since they're done entirely in blue. It really brings it to life. And also, the thighs aren't completely black anymore. They've got the same silver as this version, which again, really, really nice. And I love the extra silver they've given the sides here with the knuckle dusters. It's just a nice little touch there. Interestingly, what they've done with the midriff is they've painted the entire thing in white, so you still do get the midriff, as well as the white stripes. I think I actually prefer it to the way this version did it, where it's just left blank. Not to say this is bad, you know, there's limitations to budget and everything, but I just feel this did that all a lot better. And Hot Zone's an interesting one. I feel he's got a really unique vibe. I don't think he's on the same level as these quality-wise, but I still really love this. Again, it's kind of funny that the vehicle windows are done in black, but the torso is done in silver, but it's a really funny quirk. It feels a bit minimalist though, because you'll see the top halves of these are all painted in red, whereas this one has sort of missed it, only just doing the torso. Again, for G1 accuracy. It means that there's a lot more blue on show, but I really do like this light blue, so I don't really think there's much to complain about. The rest is just kind of par for the course. You got black thighs instead of silver, fully painted kneecaps in comparison to just the half painted, very nice touch, and Autobot symbols that are sort of slightly at an angle so they work better in robot mode. Again, it's not something I particularly mind. Will say though, I love the red on the face. I think it's a really, really nice touch. And in case you wanted to see what the f this thing looks like in robot mode, oops, come on, you Yeah, this was a mistake. But well, I was just a kid who didn't really know any better. I had fun back in the day. I might strip the paint and do a proper Fire Guts version. But for now, it's all good. Interestingly, the elbows are actually ball jointed instead of hinged like these ones. It's to save cash, but it actually makes them a lot more posable. But everything else is basically the same aside from the fact it just falls apart. Who cares? Out of the way. Anyway, size-wise, he's roughly 6.5 centimeters wide, although how you angle the shoulder pads will change that potentially, and 8 centimeters tall. And size-wise, here he is next to a standard Legion figure, which, again, he mostly is, a standard Core Class figure, a standard modern Micromaster, a standard modern Minicon, a not-so-standard Lego minifigure, and crumbs. Now, is it sad that these figures don't have the backpack? Yes, but as far as $7 Legends toys, although I think there were 5 at the time, go, they were brilliant. Every version of this is fantastic. Some of the articulation is lacking by modern standards, but for the time, they were great. And they are still wonderful desk toys to this day. It's honestly shocking that back in the day, they were able to capture the essence of the leader class so simply and so effectively. But of course, years later, the hybrid style version just failed at that. Sometimes less is more, and I think Legends of Cybertron paved the way for understanding that. None of the toys were overcomplicated, they were all simple but effective, and that is the core element of Legends in a nutshell. Third-party Legends is currently bigger than ever. Although some of the old titans are falling through the cracks by not moving with the times, on the whole, the niche is bigger than it's ever been. Even Hasbro is taking notice, reverting back from Micromasters to Legends figures to great success. Although that's a story for another time. A story that should have been shortly after this, but, you know. Given the runaway success of this niche, one would have to ask, why hasn't Hasbro jumped on this trend? Why don't they make high-end, small-scale figures? Well, aside from the product type being fairly difficult to break into, as lucrative as it may seem, people often forget they've already tried. 15 years ago, Takara initiated the Hybrid Style Initiative, and crashed and burned harder than Babylon's Fall. Call it a literal Babylon's Fall, if you will, because the first figure couldn't even stand up. Now, half of this story has already been catalogued on this channel. Despite enlisting the help of the Macross Valkyries designer, their G1 Optimus was plagued with countless issues. Shitty plastic, misused die-cast, build quality issues that f***ed with the joints, a truly abysmal transformation, bits constantly falling off. Hybrid-style Convoy was essentially Satan's checklist of action figure f***ups. However, the other half of that story hasn't been covered in great detail. Part of the reason is because it's far more rare and expensive. G1 Convoy had the original release, 2 separate black editions, and a platinum reissue, because of course platinum reissued it. When have they ever had any good ideas? Okay, I'll give you that one. As far as Galaxy Convoy was concerned, though, it was the original version, and that was it. It's no wonder the eBay prices are bloody ridiculous. For years and years, this was considered a grail of mine, a highly articulated legend-scaled Cybertron Prime. That has to be awesome, even with the fumblings of the G1 version. Well, I've finally made it. I've reached the promised land and found a copy that doesn't cost me a kidney. And now that it's over, yeah, I can see why this line crashed and burned. Greetings, Cybertronians. I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to hybrid-style THS-01 Galaxy Convoy, also known as Legend-Scale Cybertron Optimus Prime. Not to be confused with Legends of Cybertron Optimus Prime, although, to be honest, despite the lower price, I think it might be a better deal in the end. Now, it's no stretch to call Cybertron Optimus Prime's truck mode iconic amongst Transformers fans. Is it? Maybe it's my nostalgia talking, given how much I watched the show as a kid, but I've always been under the impression that a lot of people have fondness for this design. Regardless, it's got its own special feel to it that's hard to lose, even through reinterpretation. So, why does the hybrid-style version feel muted in comparison? On first glance, and even up close in many instances, everything seems to be in order. It's a very faithful recreation for the most part, only adding the designer's giantess fetish into the mix. Yes, it definitely looks like an Amogus with stretched legs sitting down, but that's always been how this mode has looked, so there isn't much to complain about there. In fact, a lot of this mode's faults can be written off given the accuracy to the original, such as the hinges on the top, the exposed matrix cavity, visible head, and feet sticking out the top. Even stuff like sliding rails being used on the side makes more sense, because how else are you going to accomplish that transformation trick at this size. Plus, it isn't on a load-bearing joint, so it's not going to do the usual sliding rail thing of breaking down over time. Oh hi, Black Convoy! The paint is also absolutely exquisite. Admittedly, the die-cast refuses to color match the base plastic, but that's not going to be noticeable under the trailer anyway, so it's hardly something to complain about. The individual paint applications are plentiful also, with tons of details picked out. Even if it's just following the original layout, it's still important to acknowledge the deco designer went above and beyond. Even the yellow is near flawless, a remarkable achievement given the difficulty in getting that color right. And the mechanical detail, fuck me, this is some good shit. Shrinking down the toyetic panel lines onto a toy this small means it's incredibly intricate. Again, this could have easily been simplified, but they chose not to. Massive kudos. So, the figure is built well, sculpted well, and painted well, so what could be wrong with it? Well, for starters, how does the engineering fare in this mode? That's how. Diecast is heavy. Hell, let's simplify that a bit. Metal is heavy. Anyone who's picked up a piece of metal in their life will know it's dense. It's not some big earth-shattering revelation, this is just simple facts. On a small, simple Legends figure, the plastic is light enough to rely on friction to keep the legs in place. With the larger version, the ratchets accomplish this. On the Galaxy Upgrade homage, they use proper tabs, as is common with modern-day figures. Hybrid-style Galaxy Convoy uses none of these. When you have a vehicle mode, the general standard should be that everything locks solidly into place. I know Cybertron was sort of a transitionary period between the gimmickified bricks of old and the more articulated design-driven bots of the new, but I can't think of any figure off the top of my head that had structural issues like this in vehicle mode from this time. Well, I can think of one, but that's not really Hasbro's case. I'm not opposed to the use of diecast in Legends figures. I used to see its inclusion as stupid, but after examining it in the smallest transforming Transformers collection, as well as several inspired uses in New Age, I've come to see its benefits. So the problem isn't that it has diecast, it's just that it doesn't have locking tabs. This isn't some whiz-bang wacky engineering system that needs thinking out of the box, it's basic Transformer Design 101. The diecast also causes another issue. For some bizarre reason, the designers have decided to include the spring-loaded wheel gimmick from the original. What happens when you combine diecast and spring-loaded gimmicks? If you answered weight issues, congratulations, you actually thought this through, unlike whoever was designing this. Getting this guy to roll properly is basically impossible, even with the use of rubber tires. I appreciate that the tires here aren't impossibly thin, making them fall off during even gentle sessions of play, but no amount of ground grip is going to overcome the weight distribution. And sure, this issue is rectified once you add the trailer, since the weight is shifted to these wheels instead. Some might not even consider this an issue anyway, as a lot of people consider the individual truck mode an afterthought, but as someone who grew up primarily on the Legends class version and not the full scale one, I'm just disappointed in the lack of care here. These issues are so easy to fix. Add the tabs on the crotch plate and remove the spring gimmick and boom! You're done! But no, preserving accuracy to a fault is far more important. As we've seen with modern third-party entries, you can be perfectly accurate whilst still delivering a fun experience. All you have to do is pick and choose what to include from the original. Sometimes things just don't translate well over. The lack of understanding there echoes what we've seen with Black Convoy prior, only fortunately on a lesser scale. Still, none of these issues compare to what I consider the worst. They done f***ed up the windows! I know this may seem innocuous, but I want you to examine the other versions again. No frame, no frame, no frame. When juxtaposed with the mean front bumper, it ends up pushing this feeling of raw power. But when you decide to expand the coverage of the white section, turning it into a full window frame, it just ends up removing that feeling. I'm perfectly fine with designs moving away and doing their own thing, but this isn't a toy that's trying to do that. When you go accurate on the whole thing and then fall flat in the most prominent section, it kinda just dampens the whole experience. It's sorta like MP52 Starscream. Ignoring all of the build quality and articulation issues, you've got this hyper-accurate body and then they f*** it over with the face sculpt. Yes, this toy is pretty small, but the principle still remains the same. Plus, this isn't a cheap figure. Its price was comparable to many third-party Legends figures today, and that's not even factoring inflation into the mix. You expect a certain level of class here, and the front section having unnecessary window frames that are counterproductive to the aesthetic kinda ruins that. Even adding the trailer doesn't take away from it. Yes, your attention isn't focused squarely on the f***ery up front, but the issue doesn't just go away. Oh well, at least the aesthetic is still pretty neat. None of the badassery has been lost in the transition to baby mode. The guns still look mean as f***, going even harder than the normal Takara version of the leader class release, with the extra silver not seen on the Hasbro version. They actually have some neat automorph at play, snapping back into place from their flight mode configuration with the press of a button. Kinda wish that effort was put into other parts of the figure, but it's still neat to see. And something I greatly appreciate is the inclusion of fully functioning cyber key gimmicks. You get 2 tiny keys in this set, and they function identically to the leader counterparts. Legit, this is awesome. Well, the blaster one slightly less so since there are no molded missiles, but it's still amazing this was included at all, especially after the recent Unicron Trilogy figures cut it out for the sake of the budget, allocating such to the articulation. Don't get me wrong, that decision was for the best, but this here shows that a lot of the time the designers really cared about bringing this figure to life. It also hints that the failures aren't due to negligence, but rather being misguided, though it can be hard to tell at times. Still, once you bring in the included articulation into the mix, on top of the extra side guns, the magic from this figure finally shines through. And hey, now that the weight distribution issues have been fixed, we can finally roll this guy into battle. Oh, the wings don't tab in, so the wheels now fold out to the sides. Okay, so with this issue, I can kinda cut him some slack. This was an issue with the original design as well, and the benefit of hindsight isn't really there when this figure was designed. We're not dealing with a remake years down the track. Hybrid style only came out 2 years after the original, in a time when engineering progress wasn't accelerating at the rate it is today. I can see why they'd forget something like this, so although it's a valid issue, it's fine. You can always hold it from the back as you move it, and rolling it around is quite fun. And even stationary, it makes an imposing piece with substantial size and awesome mechanical detail, just barely overcoming the window kerfuffle. Plus, as fans of this design will know, there's always the flight mode to engage with. And why do the guns not fully face forward? Okay, I take back any goodwill I had about the Automorph. If it's a design like this, I don't want it. Honestly, I'm pretty torn about this mode. The few good qualities he has shine incredibly brightly, those being the paint and sculpt. You can tell they've spared no expense here, but you can also tell the priorities are incredibly warped. Obviously, it's nowhere near as heinous as the G1 version, but it's still lacking in a bunch of areas. Look, if you're a display-oriented Legends collector, to which I would ask, why? What's the point of that? Then it'll do. It's a nice little centerpiece amongst the other Legends of Cybertron figures, and it could probably go alongside some of the stylized Iron Factory stuff. If you're looking for the perfect Legends representation of this alt mode though, well, sorry, guess you're up creek. Seriously, if someone made a 3D printed trailer for the Legends version, it'd probably be a better option than this. Doubly so with the price it goes for these days. Oh mama! But well, at present, no one has done that yet. Until we get better options on the market, it occupies a similar space to the alt mode of Iron Factory Drift. A few points of charm, but definitely flawed, though ultimately, it'll do if we never get another version. Technically speaking, all the steps between this and the full-scale version are pretty much the same. Every chunk moves in the exact same way, every piece ends up in the exact same place, but for some reason, it just feels underdone in comparison. Doesn't really make much sense considering they already did that on the Legends of Cybertron version, and it worked fine. But for some bizarre reason, there are just little changes with this one that don't end up working. Of course, the first thing you want to do is bring the legs down like so, bring the hip skirt down with them, and then something a little bit different because we don't have the spring-loaded gimmick. What you want to do is bring these out a little bit, then rotate them down, and then push it in together. Slightly different, but it does work for the size. Just be careful because there are separate sockets and separate ball joints inside here, and they can come undone pretty easily. So just be careful as you're doing it. But anyway, separate the legs like so. Then the one original step that this guy has, you want to separate these two tabs from these parts here, holding the whole thing together with the waist joint. Of course, it wasn't necessary on the original because there wasn't a waist joint. Bring the arms down like so. Come to the front, and we have sliding rails to bring these to the front like that, and then they close up. Sort of like the original, but sort of not. Difference being instead of there being a double hinge, it's sliding rails. But these sliding rails I don't really mind, considering they're not on load-bearing joints, and even if they become loose over time, there are still locking points for them, and it's fine. And they lock into each other here, so who really cares? It's not going to be a problem for longevity. Separate the arms like that. Then you got double hinges, just like the original, and they rotate around to the front, and they clip into place like so. The arms, of course, rotate around into their regular position, and then you come around to the back, and you can see that you've got sliding rails that these actually slide up on, and this is actually going to cause problems later, unlike the chest. Oh, that fell off, but that doesn't really happen very often. Falling off isn't really the issue, it's more about the way they're situated, but I'll get to that in the robot mode, provided I can get this thing back on, come on. And of course, last but not least, you want to bring up the head, but this actually functions a little bit differently. You pull this down and then push the whole thing up like so, and then it pushes down into itself again, locking it into place. Gotta say, this is the one part of the transformation that I prefer over the original. The original is just a sliding joint, so it kinda can break down over time and have the head sag into the torso. Not with my copy, but I have heard it's happened. But with this way, it's actually got something that locks it into place solidly. Not with tabs, but with friction friction that functions. So yeah, good job hybrid style Galaxy Convoy, you actually did something well. But the rest of it, I don't know, it just feels like a massive downgrade. Don't get me wrong, I can't call this a bad transformation because it's almost the same as a really good one. It's ultimately serviceable, but as a fun toy to transform, it doesn't really hit that mark. Again, like I've kind of hinted at earlier, they're going more for the accuracy than the spirit of the original. The spirit of the original is a big, chunky, fun transformer, something which, ironically, once again, the Legends of Cybertron version did quite well. But that simple joy is just lost here. Again, not a bad transformation, but not really capturing the essence of Cybertron Optimus Prime. In robot mode, yeah, once again I'm really conflicted. Unlike the previous modes though, it's not really a bunch of small issues and a few strong positives, but rather a lot of peaks and one pretty egregious valley. Most of the minuscule nitpicks can be forgiven in the context of Hybrid Style's release, but that one issue, it kinda sours the experience. Once again though, the paintwork and sculpt work has been knocked out of the park. Now that the windows are on the side and out of sight, this thing just screams Cybertron Optimus Prime. From head to toe, this guy just oozes the chunkiness of the original design. And yes, it's hard to fuck up this style anyway, but I have to say they've done a real bang-up job. The head sculpt cannot be described as anything other than on the money. You don't get any of the bloat found on the G1 version, just pure brow power over here. Also, wow, how the hell did the ears snap off this? Is the plastic really that wibbly? Honestly, I don't remember this happening, but whatever. Not a figure I really care for anyway. The torso also gets right on point with those perfectly angular inward hexagons. Dig how they've highlighted the top lights, giving a bit of unnecessary but greatly appreciated extra flair. It even opens up to reveal a ridiculously tiny matrix of leadership. I'm, not going to remove that after this video. I don't trust myself, I'm just going to lose it. Moving down, the power boots work as well as you'd expect. They've got some hefty die-cast on the front portions to keep the balance working properly. Works much better than the full-leg die-cast of the G1 version, since there aren't any sliding rails relying on metal parts that will break the plastic over time. Although don't worry, we'll get to that in due season. In the meantime though, the silver comes through insanely well, keeping the premium feel at maximum levels. The materials used and the paint applied really shows where the budget for this thing went. Again, it's not a toy where they've spared any expense. Given the last review I did, it's a nice change of pace. Admittedly, I do kinda wish he had a thigh swivel instead of a knee swivel, much like the original. It was probably entirely possible given the engineering, but I can imagine the designers were hesitant on this. This was pretty much Takara's first ever collector-grade small-scale transformer, predating the G1 version in the lineup. As such, I can see why they would have had plastic solidity concerns. They also chickened out on the waist swivel, surrounding it with protective kibble so that it doesn't get damaged. Annoying, but hey, neither of the original versions had a waist swivel. We wouldn't see one until the Siege release, so it's hardly something to get angry about. And hey, the rest of the articulation works well enough. He's not really missing anything aside from a proper ankle tilt, as the toes are really just there for aesthetic, letting the die-cast weight hold him in place instead. Not particularly something to get angry over though. The way the legs transform doesn't really facilitate a proper ankle tilt, especially at the time this came out. So with most of the figures seeming bang on, what's there to complain about? The few issues surrounding it seem to make sense in the release year of 2006, going well above the standard of the time. What could possibly f this mode over? Well, tell me, why the f is there die-cast in the shoulders? Okay, so when the original Hybrid Style Black Convoy review came out, and I mean the review specifically, not the original figure release, die-cast in Legends figures wasn't all that common. To be honest, for the most part, it still isn't, but that's beside the point. The only point of reference I had was this bullshit interpretation, where they used die-cast pieces in junction with sliding rails. A ridiculous decision, really. The results speak for themselves. In the few short years since this figure's review, not even having this figure on display, this is the best I can do with the robot mode. Absolutely pathetic. That said, New Age has since taken the charge by incorporating incredibly tasteful applications. These rebalance figures so that standing them works much better. Now, I'm aware in recent years there's been a growing push against the inclusion of diecast, claiming it's naught but a budget booster allowing companies to create a false sense of weight and charge extra.
You know, if you want to quote one of my controversial takes, I'd appreciate it if you gave me the credit for it. I thrive on the chaos it would bring me.
Well, I was trying to be polite. Anonymity is often preferable in these instances.
Screw you! Send them off to my door!
Look, point is people took a look at a lot of the fans' toys releases and their somewhat dubious uses of unnecessary diecast and developed a distaste for it. While I understand that, and while I used to feel the same way for Legends figures at least, that opinion has subsided. Hell, on this figure we've seen a great example of such in the legs. So, what was the problem with Hybrid Style Black Convoy? Diecast meets load-bearing joints and sliding rails. And what's the problem with Hybrid Style Galaxy Convoy? Diecast meets load-bearing joints and sliding rails. For some bizarre bizarre reason, the fronts of the shoulders are cast completely in die-cast. While the paint covering it works really well, especially considering the difficulty in painting red, it means there's no real way to lock them in place. The joint that connects them is really thin, since it can't be pinned into the metal.
Why isn't it possible?
It's just not.
Why not, you stupid bastard?
Either way, this places all the load on the back, which also uses the insanely tiny peg to keep it locked in place. And it's held together using clear plastic, which breaks down over time. Who thought this was a good idea? You know how Black Convoy had the leg issue? Well, imagine that, but on the shoulders. Don't know if it's better or worse, but either way, considering the underside is hollow as it's basically ruined its longevity. If you leave it on a shelf and never bump it at all, sure, it may be fine. But better hope you don't live in an earthquake zone, or near a busy street, or in a zombie apocalypse, or in Siege. Longevity is always something I take very seriously with my figures. If something is going to break down over time and cause issues with stability, I consider that a failure in my book. Especially with collector grade products too. These are expensive investments. You're putting a hefty down payment on this shit. You expect it to last well into the future. As such, a lot of the goodwill I had towards this mode is lost. The multiple highs clash with this extreme low and cancel each other out into a robot mode that's honestly just okay. I can see the potential for a perfect representation of the character at this scale with but a few small tweaks. All they had to do was implement the simpler hinge that the Legends one had and hey presto, figure fixed. But no, they had to be as accurate as possible. They failed to realize that at such a scale, sacrifices have to be made with the accuracy in order to facilitate a better experience. Accuracy and Legends can potentially go hand in hand, but you have to know the hardware and you have to know the point where enough is enough. Otherwise, things just crumble under the weight of the designer's hubris. Again, I can't call this mode bad by any means. It looks great, sizes up well with most modern Legends, and poses decently for the time. It's just the shoulders are unacceptable. This should not have been a thing. Ah well, guess I should cover accessories. You get 3 extra sets of fists, covering pointing, open hands, and grasping motions. The last of these allow you to access the included rifle, or at least it's supposed to. This rubber doesn't really catch onto the handle, so it doesn't work that well. At least it still works with the backpack, and the backpack works well enough. Yes, you have to swap out the head, but at this size I can't imagine getting the flip out ears to work. Either way, it works as advertised. Can't say the same for the heel supports though. These are pretty loose, which is annoying given how integral they are for stability. Still, this mode was never the most posable on the original, so realistically you're not going to get that dynamic with it. It should do well enough. Yes, it's disappointing that it lacks the sheer presence of the original, but hey, ultimately it does what it's set out to do. And that's why I feel so conflicted about this figure. As a standalone release, I can't really rate it very low. There's a lot of good and a lot of bad, and those factors clash in the middle to reveal a, well, middling release. It's definitely not worth the aftermarket prices, but if you can get it for a solid $150 like I did, and you really need this figure in your collection, then sure, go for it. But don't hype this up as one of the greatest Legends figures to ever release. It's old and it's got a lot of jank. In this day and age, there's a metric ton that could be improved with him. Only thing is, no one's putting in the effort, because at present it's all eyes on the G1 cast. Another reason to call upon 3D designers to make a trailer for the Legends version. Come on mate, give us the goods! Speaking of, if you're looking for a fun desk toy that's also a small version of Cybertron Prime, I'd just go for the Legends version. It's a much more solid piece at a fraction of the price and comes in several flavors to choose from. Was actually supposed to cover it in this year's Victory Lap, but we all know how that turned out. In the meantime though, hybrid style Galaxy Convoy provides an interesting glimpse into why the line flopped so hard out of the gates. It's important to remember that Cybertron Prime was the first release in the series, and G1 Prime followed. Yes, in a vacuum this figure works well enough, but under the shadow of the original, it just doesn't compare. Cybertron Leader Class Optimus Prime is a statement of intent. This is the culmination of the Unicron Trilogy, even if it wasn't really a trilogy in Japan. Hybrid style doesn't really capture that, and as a result, you're kinda left cold. Then combine that with the intent of this design. Not a lot of it lends itself to play. Sure, it has all the gimmicks from the original, but it really shines in a static pose on a shelf. To kind of put it in a metaphor, it's sort of like ordering oysters kill Patrick, but they arrive and the chef has used barbecue sauce instead of Worcestershire. It's perfectly edible and it doesn't taste too bad, but it's not really what you were expecting when you ordered it. And you're unable to taste the base flavor, that being the oysters. Or in the instance of the figure, you lose sight of the core values of Legends figures, that being the fun factor. I'm aware in recent months people have been criticizing my assertion position that Legends figures should be primarily play-based, claiming that many people prefer the display aspects. While I'm aware that's part of the fun for some people, I'm not sure that subset of fans is as big as people make it out to be. When developing a collection for display, countless times I've seen people go with Chug or Masterpiece for the simple fact that it looks better on a shelf. When you remove the play factor from Cybertron Prime, all you have is the display factor, and for that, a Legends figure cannot compete with a full-scale leader class. What incentivized people to try out this line when a better version in almost every conceivable way already exists at a fraction of the price? And then G1 Prime comes along and, well, you know the rest. From this point, hybrid style was officially dead. Cybertron Prime didn't give people a reason to get on board, and G1 Prime murdered any interest in cold blood through his shittiness. This is how a line fails in 2 mere entries, and that is a perfect example of how you don't get a second first impression. You gotta make it count when you start things out. Iron Factory did with their release of Slammer and Six Gun. New Age did with their release of Bumblebee. Hasbro did with both the Legends of Cybertron and the recent Core class. Hybrid style flat out didn't, and although in a vacuum this figure is serviceable despite its issues, no figure exists in such. But as always, fan and public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your thoughts on the hybrid style line below. Do you have interest in these 2 releases, even knowing their issues? Do you feel the Unicron Trilogy has a future in the small scale, or do 3P companies have too much of a hard-on for G1? And as always, there's a context for everything. Sorry this couldn't be part of the Legendary Marathon proper, but regardless, till next time. What's that noise? Why is it getting louder? Oh no! Ah, fuck.